What if the way you brew your morning coffee, or even the way you scroll through your phone, isn't entirely your choice? This 3-hour journey dives deep into the forgotten protocols and historical currents that are subtly, almost invisibly, shaping our modern lives. Prepare to see the world, and your own actions, in a completely new light. Let's start with first. Unwritten civic courtesy. You don't notice the rules at first. No signs. No penalty printed in bold. But the moment you step into a crowded elevator, you feel them press down. Everyone turns toward the doors, eyes fixed on the floor numbers, shoulders squared forward. No one explains this ritual, yet everyone follows it. Break it, turn to face the others, laugh too loudly into your phone, and the silence tightens. People shift. Someone coughs. The space itself tells you, not here. This is the invisible law of unwritten civic courtesy, stronger in practice than many statutes carved into stone. Look at the sidewalk. There is no legal code that dictates which side you should walk on. Yet without a word, crowds sort themselves into flowing streams, predicting each other's moves by glances and subtle shifts of weight. It's choreography without rehearsal. Stop suddenly at the top of the stairs to check your messages, and you'll feel the ripple of irritation pulse through the crowd. No ticket, no fine, but a judgment just as sharp. The queue is perhaps the clearest symbol. A line is a miracle of order among strangers. It says, we will share space by sequence, not by strength. To cut in front of others is to announce you reject this fragile contract. The punishment is immediate, not legal but social. The glares, the muttered accusations, the crowd stiffening against you. No law enforcer needed. The people police themselves. Courtesy is older than legislation. Its roots lie in reciprocity. I lower my voice here so you may enjoy your quiet too. It protects dignity. Strangers give each other space to exist without intrusion. And it reduces risk. Predictable behavior keeps conflict from sparking where lives brush against each other in tight quarters. This is why trains fall silent at dawn, why bus passengers rise without being told to give up a seat for the pregnant woman or the elder. These are not rules written on paper, but rules carved into the collective mind. Every city speaks its own dialect of politeness. In Tokyo, silence in trains is sacred. In New York, conversation spills openly across subway cars. In Delhi, a horn is not rage but communication, a code of rhythm and urgency. Cultures disagree on the details, yet all agree on the purpose: to keep strangers close without turning closeness into chaos. Take the escalator. In many places, people stand to one side and walk on the other. No authority enforces this. But step into the wrong lane and hear the sharp, "Excuse me," feel the bodies pressing against invisible rails of order. Or consider the bus, a seat left empty for the person who needs it most. The judgment against the one who ignores this is silent but enduring. He sat while she stood. That single act writes itself into memory far longer than the bus ride lasts. Phones have created new arenas of unwritten law. Use your speaker in a cafe and you are breaking a treaty. Record strangers without consent and you fracture trust. Even bright screens in dark theaters signal betrayal of the pact everyone paid to honor. None of this is legislated, but everyone knows. Step aside with your call on a sidewalk and you reinforce the invisible contract. Keep your head down and clog the flow, and you announce yourself as an outsider to the code. Unwritten courtesy is fragile, yet it is what keeps the machinery of public life from seizing. When it erodes, law grows harsher. Litter long enough and the state bans bags. Drive recklessly and cameras rise like watchtowers. Healthy societies depend less on enforcement because the crowd already knows how to regulate itself. Broken ones require constant surveillance to replace the courtesies that vanished. And these rules shine brightest in crisis. During blackouts, strangers direct traffic with hand signals at dark intersections. After floods, neighbors form lines for water without anyone commanding them. In disasters, we often discover that courtesy outpaces law. When the system falters, humans remember how to be a public. But there is danger too. Courtesy can curdle into exclusion. If the unwritten rules are used to shame accents, mock disabilities, or exile the young, they stop protecting and start policing. The test is simple. Do these norms make room for the vulnerable, or do they push them out? A laugh too loud is not a crime. A teenager's music is not rebellion. Real courtesy absorbs difference. Fake courtesy demands conformity. So how do we strengthen the good kind? By practicing it in public, making it visible. Offer your seat before anyone asks. Thank loudly, so others hear. Hold the door not just for the one behind you, but for the chain of people coming after. Correct gently, point to the quiet sign, smile when you gesture for someone to lower their voice. Let numbers enforce what anger cannot. Many soft voices shape space better than one hard shout. Tomorrow, walk through your day and count the mercies. The driver who slows so you can cross. The stranger who returns your forgotten wallet. The small nod at the cafe door that keeps two bodies from colliding. Each act is a signature on the invisible constitution of civic life. Each is a reminder that no statute can require grace. Only people can give it. Unwritten civic courtesy is not nostalgia for a vanished age. It is the living bloodstream of crowded life today, adapting to technology, to changing streets, to frayed attention spans. It is what allows strangers to breathe near each other without conflict. It is what turns a crowd into a community, if only for a heartbeat. And every time you step outside, you are asked to sign it again. Not with ink, but with patience, with restraint, with the smallest sacrifice of your own comfort. That is what makes the city bearable. That is what makes the city human. Mirror authority ritual. You think the age of bowing ended long ago, but the truth is, the ritual never disappeared, it only disguised itself. Watch carefully. You lower your eyes in an elevator when someone important steps in. You step aside in a hallway to let a uniformed figure pass. You wait at an office doorway for half a second before entering, as if asking for invisible permission. These are not accidents. They are echoes of ancient customs, carried into the present by your body, rehearsed for centuries without you realizing it. The mirror reflects not just your face, but the choreography of deference etched into your muscles. In medieval courts, bowing was survival. Passing a threshold before a superior could cost you dearly. Today, the threshold still carries weight. You hesitate before crossing into a boss's office, even if the door is wide open. That pause, that head dip, is a compressed kneel. The nod we use casually in greetings was once a fragment of submission, the hat tip a safer echo of bowing. Rituals shrink, but they rarely die. They live on as muscle memory, thinly disguised as politeness. Chairs tell the same story. The throne never vanished, it multiplied. The head of the table in a boardroom is a throne. The raised barstool that lets you survey a cafe is a rented throne for the hour. Even classrooms hold small fortresses, the teacher's desk, slightly elevated, a moat of walking space around it. On airplanes, the first-class curtain is nothing but a velvet screen, a modern version of the medieval partition. You may glance, but you cannot cross. Furniture arranges obedience as effectively as any crown. Uniforms are coats of arms translated into fabric. A police officer's badge, a pilot's stripes, a doctor's scrubs, these garments command compliance the way heraldry once did. In airports, you strip your shoes, empty your pockets, raise your arms. The scanner hums like a mechanical priest, demanding offerings before passage. People fall silent at the ritual arch, not from law, but from awe. It's obedience wrapped in procedure, sanctity engineered through routine. Cameras and microphones replaced altars and pulpits. A lens pointed at you makes your back straighten, your tone soften, your hands restless. Press conferences arrange authority with lecterns raised high, flags spread like banners, and cameras tilted upward to remind your neck of its place. Even online, the checkmark of verification functions as a digital crown. Arguments shrink when the blue badge enters the thread. Status has migrated from marble halls to glowing screens, but the ritual of bowing persists, pixel by pixel. Language hides genuflections inside its velvet folds. Quick question, you write, kneeling to soften the request. Circling back, is the knock on the chamber door. Per our last conversation, is the ceremonial reminder that you hold the scrolls. In many cultures, strangers are still wrapped in titles: Sir, Madam, Uncle, Bia, Didi. These are not just words, they are verbal bows, protective shields against the chaos of equality. Even emojis reenact ritual: folded hands, soft smiles, floating hearts. We kneel digitally with every tap of the screen. Watch the sidewalks, another stage for hidden choreography. Two people approach, one breaks eye contact and shifts aside. That is a bow. On escalators, standing left while others walk right is a corridor ritual of yielding. In traffic, cars edge aside for sirens, forming a moving aisle like peasants clearing a path for a royal procession. The siren is the trumpet, the flashing light the banner. Ancient reverence survives under asphalt and neon. Even touch carries echoes. The handshake began as a weapon check, yet the angle of palms still speaks: dominance above, deference below. A hug disguises hierarchy, the back pat is a subtle claim of rank. When someone places a guiding hand on your elbow, your body obeys before your mind registers it. The choreography of power lives in fingertips as much as in words. Markets sell obedience dressed as luxury. Velvet ropes at clubs, priority lanes, loyalty tiers named after metals and gems: bronze, silver, gold, platinum. It's medieval rank repackaged for wallets. Coffee shops create small ceremonies. The barista calls a name, the crowd turns as one, each hand extended like a parishioner waiting for communion. Foam replaces incense, but the ritual feels the same. You do not snatch, you receive, you retreat, you make space for the next worshipper. At home, rituals continue through machines. Smart speakers light up when summoned, their glowing rings recalling miniature thrones. Streaming platforms crown thumbnails, pushing your attention as if decreeing what you should watch. Trending lists are council decrees disguised as entertainment. You dress your profile in banners, crests, and slogans, digital coats of arms declaring your rank in the invisible court of attention. Even when people resist, the ritual adapts. Someone barges into a room without knocking, ignores uniforms, talks back to authority. But then they log into a game where guild leaders sit on digital thrones. Or they enter workplace chats where reaction emojis kneel beneath a manager's posts. Resistance rarely destroys ritual. It simply invents new costumes. Why does this matter? Because these small bows and pauses decide who feels at home and who feels excluded. The mother with a stroller, forced to wait because others didn't yield. The intern with an idea, silenced because their badge lacked weight. The patient ignored because their voice carried no title. Courtesy is not neutral. It distributes power. It is a river carved by centuries of hierarchy, and without attention, it always flows downhill. The answer is not to abolish respect, but to redirect it. When you hold the head of the table, pull another chair beside you. When you pause at a doorway, turn it into an invitation, not a barrier. Yield not only to sirens but also to silence, to the quiet figure who carries no badge but carries weight all the same. Online, let your ritual be attention itself. Listen to those without crowns when they speak truth. Choose where to kneel. Because the mirror does not command, it reflects. What you practice becomes the posture others copy. Every nod, every pause, every title whispered is a rehearsal for tomorrow's choreography. The age of bowing did not end, it waits in your body. The question is, will you bend to rank, or will you let the ritual honor dignity instead? The choice, invisible but immense, is the new crown you wear. Trial by public opinion. Imagine stepping into the heart of a medieval town square. The air is filled with the smell of smoke and sweat, and at the center stands a wooden structure, the pillory. A man's head and hands are locked in place as the crowd gathers around. They don't need evidence. They don't need a trial. The sight of his humiliation is enough to satisfy them. Rotten vegetables fly, laughter roars, insults cut deeper than whips. This was justice, not in a courtroom, but in the theater of public shame. It was punishment without appeal, a verdict rendered not by law, but by the collective scorn of the people. For centuries, this was how societies kept order. not only through prisons and executions, but through the terror of being mocked, exposed, and humiliated in front of one's peers. Now, fast forward to today. The wooden stocks are gone, the crowds no longer gather in the square, but the ritual survives. It has simply migrated into the digital world. A misstep, a single word, a captured moment, posted, shared, amplified. Within hours, millions become the new mob, ready to jeer, condemn, and destroy. The stage is no longer the town square, it is the infinite reach of the internet. The audience is not a few hundred neighbors but millions of strangers, each voice adding to the storm. The punishment, loss of reputation, loss of livelihood, exile from the community, echoes of the same social death once inflicted by public shaming in ancient times. To understand why this works, we have to understand something deeper about human psychology. Shame is one of the oldest tools of social control. Long before there were written laws, societies enforced rules through reputation. If you betrayed trust, stole, or violated sacred customs, you weren't always killed, you were shamed, ostracized, exiled. For ancient Greeks, exile was worse than execution, because it meant living without a community, cut off from honor, belonging, and identity. In medieval Europe, the scarlet letter branded on a woman's chest, or the pillory in the town square, reminded everyone that once your honor was gone, you could never truly return. And that fear kept others in line. But here is the chilling part, our digital world has reawakened these same instincts, only magnified 1,000 times over. A single viral outrage can reach more people in one night than the biggest medieval crowd could in a century. And the cruelty is no less real. Careers have been destroyed overnight. A teacher makes a thoughtless joke, a teenager posts an offensive comment, a celebrity's private life is exposed. Suddenly, they are in the modern pillory, surrounded by jeering voices, stripped of dignity before an audience that never disperses. The stocks of wood are gone, but the internet never forgets. What makes this so dangerous is that there is rarely proportion. In ancient times, even the pillory had limits. A shamed person endured their punishment for a day or two, then walked away. The tomatoes rotted, the crowd went home, life continued. But online shame is permanent. Screenshots endure, search engines preserve, algorithms resurface old sins again and again. What was once a temporary humiliation becomes a life sentence. Imagine being forever locked in the pillory, your face frozen while new crowds throw insults decades later. That is the reality of digital shaming. We also have to ask ourselves, who benefits? In medieval times, public shaming was not only punishment but entertainment. Crowds laughed at the humiliated as a way of reaffirming their own morality. I am not like that criminal, I am better. Today, social media outrage serves the same purpose. People join the mob not always out of justice, but out of a need to display virtue, to be seen as righteous. Algorithms reward outrage, because nothing spreads faster than scandal. Platforms thrive on anger, attention, and conflict. The more we condemn, the more clicks are generated. The machine feeds on shame. Examples are everywhere. Think of the writer who made a bad joke on a plane, only to land and find her life destroyed by millions of strangers she never met. Think of countless workers fired after videos of them went viral, condemned without context, stripped of any chance to explain. Some deserved it, others did not. But in both cases, the punishment was absolute, far outstripping what any courtroom would impose. This is not justice, it is theater. A ritual where society purges its anger by sacrificing individuals on the altar of public opinion. And yet, we can't dismiss the power of shame completely. In ancient villages, it was a way of enforcing norms when there were no police. In modern times, collective outrage has exposed corruption, toppled abusers, and forced accountability from those in power. There is a strange duality here. Public shaming can be both the most brutal form of injustice and the only weapon ordinary people have against the untouchable elite. It is both necessary and dangerous, both a form of justice and a form of mob violence. So we are left with a haunting question. Are we really so different from the medieval villagers who gathered in the square to watch humiliation as entertainment? We tell ourselves we are more advanced, more civilized, more compassionate. But every viral outrage, every destroyed life, every feeding frenzy of condemnation tells another story. Technology has changed, but the instinct has not. The trial by public opinion is older than law itself, and it will outlive the courtrooms and constitutions we build. Because deep down, humanity has always known, the sharpest weapon is not the sword, but shame. And perhaps the most chilling truth of all is this: once the mob has chosen its target, no defense is strong enough. In ancient times, you could appeal to the king, the church, or the Lord for mercy. Today, you cannot appeal to the internet. It has no judge, no jury, no end. It is the eternal crowd, always watching, always ready to condemn. The stocks are gone, but the pillory lives on, transformed into pixels, shares, and hashtags. And in this new world, anyone, at any moment, can be the next to stand at its center. Honor Debt Code. There is a kind of law older than courts, older than kings, older even than the written word. It does not live in books, nor is it carved into stone. It resides in the marrow of human expectation. The Honor Debt Code. An invisible contract, a binding chain that links the giver and the receiver in a delicate balance of obligation. When someone does you a kindness, it is never simply a gift. It becomes a weight on your chest, a mark etched into the invisible ledger of human dealings. The moment you accept it, a story begins. A story that cannot remain unfinished until you pay it back, or pay it forward. Think of how uncomfortable it feels when you owe someone, even for something small. A neighbor helps carry your heavy groceries up the stairs. A colleague covers your mistake at work without exposing you. A friend lends you money when your wallet is thin. Gratitude blooms, but alongside it comes unease, a whisper that says, "Now you owe." It's not written down, no deadline is set, yet the pressure is undeniable. It haunts you until the scales are even. And if they are never balanced, you begin to avoid the person, ashamed or guilty, because their presence reminds you of the unpaid debt. That is the raw power of this code. It governs not through force, but through conscience. Across cultures, this unspoken contract takes different names, but the essence is the same. In Japan, the concept of giri binds people to repay social obligations, sometimes across generations. In China, ren-qing marks the weight of favors, a debt that lingers like incense smoke. In India, ehsan is both blessing and burden. Accepting it without repayment can brand you as dishonorable. Even in the West, where independence is prized, the saying lingers, one good turn deserves another. The words may differ, but the command is universal. Reciprocity is not optional. To reject it is to step outside the unwritten law of humanity. The code has fueled entire economies long before money existed. Anthropologists studying ancient tribes found that exchanges of food, tools, or shelter were rarely free. They were part of a cycle of reciprocity. A hunter who shared his kill today could expect help tomorrow when his hands were empty. This wasn't charity, it was survival. To fail in repayment meant exile, and exile often meant death. Even in modern times, the shadow of this old truth lingers. Think of the mafia's famous phrase, "You owe me a favor." Or think of political backrooms, where alliances are bought not with cash, but with the currency of obligation. Every favor called in, every loyalty demanded, rests on the same ancient law. But the Honor Debt Code is double-edged. At its best, it builds networks of trust. It ensures that kindness is not wasted, that generosity becomes a cycle rather than a dead end. At its worst, it becomes a weapon. Manipulators use false generosity to trap others, performing favors they never intend to leave unbalanced. A gift given with expectation can be more dangerous than a loan. History is full of rulers and warlords who secured loyalty not by threats, but by favors too heavy to repay. To accept their gift was to accept servitude. This is why even today, we sometimes resist help. Because deep down, we know every kindness is a hook, and every hook carries a line. Consider the battlefield story of a soldier spared by an enemy. Mercy itself becomes a debt. How can one live, knowing that life was purchased by another's restraint? Stories tell of men who crossed borders after wars, searching for the ones who let them live, desperate to settle the balance. Or think of literature, where entire plots are built on the unpaid favor, the stranger who once pulled a man from a river returning years later to demand help in a rebellion. We recognize the pattern instinctively. Debt, once owed, is a chain that can stretch across decades. Even in everyday life, the weight of this code drives choices we don't fully see. Why do we bring gifts to dinner parties? Why do we tip waiters, even when service is mediocre? Why do we feel compelled to lend an ear when a friend once listened to us cry? It is not law, nor religion, nor even morality in the strictest sense. It is survival instinct wrapped in ritual. To give is to gain leverage. To receive is to inherit duty. And no culture escapes it. Yet here lies the paradox. The code ensures cooperation, but it also ensures entanglement. What begins as kindness can spiral into cycles of endless repayment. You help me, I help you, you help me again, and soon we are bound in a chain that neither of us can break without betrayal. Whole families, even nations, have been tied together by such invisible debts. Alliances, vendettas, traditions of hospitality, all orbit around the honor debt code like planets around an unseen sun. And when the cycle breaks, the consequences are explosive. A debt unacknowledged festers into resentment. A favor unreturned becomes an accusation. And betrayal of kindness is often remembered longer than betrayal of law. There is also an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes repayment is impossible. What repayment balances a mother's sacrifice for her child? What equals the doctor who pulls you back from the edge of death? What can match the stranger who jumps into icy water to save you? These debts are eternal, and so they shift from repayment into reverence. We call them lifelong gratitude, but in reality, they are lifelong bonds, chains not of iron, but of honor. And we carry them silently, woven into our stories, passed down through generations as family legends. The honor debt code may be unspoken, but it is one of the strongest forces shaping human behavior. Courts cannot enforce it, armies cannot defend against it, yet it compels us as strongly as hunger or fear. It pushes us to kindness, binds us in loyalty, ensnares us in manipulation, and sometimes crushes us under impossible obligation. We live inside its invisible ledger every day. And the haunting truth is this: no one escapes it. Even if you think you live freely, your life is threaded with debts of gratitude and gifts of trust. The question is not whether you owe, but to whom. And whether, when the time comes, you will rise to repay, or turn away, and break the oldest law of them all. Architectural obedience. Imagine walking into a cathedral. You feel small, humbled, compelled to move forward in silence. You think it's reverence, but part of it is the design. The towering ceilings, the narrowing aisles, the light streaming through stained glass. These elements don't just decorate, they direct. They funnel your body, guide your gaze, dictate your pace. This is architectural obedience, the invisible leash of design that moves you before you even realize you've been led. And once you start noticing, you'll see it everywhere, not just in cathedrals, but in every hallway, plaza, and street you pass through. Cities are full of subtle instructions. A curved bench discourages sleeping on it. A set of steps in front of a government building slows you down, forcing you to lift your feet in measured rhythm, almost like approaching a throne. Even the height of doorways makes you instinctively bow your head, not out of respect, but out of necessity. Yet the gesture lingers in the mind as something deferential, something humbling. Designers know this. They always have. From the temples of Greece to the courtyards of imperial palaces, architecture has been less about shelter and more about choreography, directing how humans move, pause, gather, or disperse. Think of airports. You believe you're walking freely toward your gate, but every element has already mapped your journey. The long corridors stretch just enough to make you anxious about time. Moving walkways appear when impatience peaks, tricking you into gratitude for efficiency. Duty-free shops are positioned so that you must pass them to reach your terminal, their open layouts nudging you to wander inside. Even the signs aren't neutral. Their height and font size manipulate how fast your eyes scan and where you stop. You don't notice it, but your body is obeying a silent script. or take prisons. The panopticon design, imagined by Jeremy Bentham, allowed a single guard in a central tower to see every prisoner without the prisoners knowing if they were being watched. The circular layout wasn't just functional, it was psychological. The architecture created obedience not through chains or whips, but through the possibility of surveillance. Walls and windows became the enforcers, training bodies to police themselves. Today, echoes of this design appear in schools, offices, and even shopping malls. Open layouts, glass walls, central hubs, they whisper the same message: you are visible. Stay in line. Consider urban plazas. In Renaissance Italy, wide-open squares were not simply decorative, they were stages. Rulers designed them to hold processions, military parades, and public punishments. The openness meant no escape from spectacle. Your feet would stop where the crowd stopped, your eyes would follow the execution scaffold, your voice would be drowned by the architecture's acoustic funnel. And centuries later, we build similar plazas outside government buildings or corporate headquarters. Vast emptiness framed by towering facades reminds you, this is power, and you are small inside it. Sometimes obedience is disguised as comfort. Shopping malls soften your edges with gentle curves so you never walk in a straight line. Straight lines encourage speed, curves slow you down, keep you browsing. Escalators never drop you exactly where you want to be, they lead you just far enough away that you pass 3 more stores before arriving at your target. Music, lighting, even the placement of bathrooms, all of it is spatial persuasion. You think you choose to linger, but the architecture lingers you. Even nature parks follow the rule. Trails are cut to guide your steps toward particular views. Benches are placed at moments of exhaustion, forcing your pause exactly where the landscape is most dramatic. Bridges and lookouts are angled to frame the horizon in ways no wild path ever would. The illusion is freedom in nature, but the reality is choreography through design. Your awe is genuine, but the timing has been staged. Now, imagine modern workplaces. Open office plans are sold as collaborative, but their geometry creates obedience. Few walls mean few secrets. Long sight lines keep you aware of being watched. Desks arranged in clusters generate a pressure to remain at your station, to mirror the stillness of others. Even the glass meeting rooms, transparent boxes where private discussions are impossible, reinforce a culture of exposure. It's not just about saving space. It's about making your body conform to the rhythm of visibility. The psychology of doorways and thresholds reveals even more. Grand hotels use oversized revolving doors, making you slow down, breaking your stride into segments. This interrupts your autonomy, reasserting the authority of the building before you even enter. Casinos, on the other hand, eliminate clocks and windows, creating a timeless cocoon where your body cannot orient itself. You obey the rhythm of the floor, not the sun. And cathedrals? Their long naves pull you like a river, narrowing until you are deposited at the altar, your head already bent, your voice already softened. Some architects admit this openly. They call it wayfinding or behavioral design. Others hide it under the language of beauty and utility. But the truth is that walls, corridors, and plazas are not neutral. They are arguments made in stone and steel, instructions given without words. They channel not just movement but thought. They decide when you pause, where you look, and what you feel. And when you finally notice it, the world around you becomes unsettling. That path you thought you chose? It was carved for you. That pause you took at the monument? It was engineered. That silence you felt inside the hall? It was built into the ceiling. You realize obedience isn't always demanded, it is designed. Not shouted, but whispered through angles, shadows, and lines. And you, like everyone else, obey without ever calling it obedience. Oratory respect pause. You have seen it, though you may not have noticed. A hall full of people, a single speaker taking the stage, and suddenly, the air changes. Voices stop mid-sentence. Even coughs are stifled. The silence is not commanded by law, nor enforced by guards. It is summoned by something older, deeper. The unwritten rule that when someone speaks before the many pause in respect. This is the oratory respect pause, a centuries-old ritual of silence that still shapes how human beings gather, how authority is recognized, and how words transform into power. In ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, the agora was not simply a marketplace of goods but a marketplace of voices. Philosophers, politicians, and ordinary citizens spoke in turn, but only one could hold the floor at a time. To speak over another was not simply rude, it was a civic crime, a violation of the democratic experiment itself. Silence, then, was not absence. It was participation. It meant, I give space so that meaning may grow. Roman senators practiced the same unspoken law. When Cicero rose to deliver his thunderous orations, rivals who despised him still fell quiet, because the silence was not for Cicero the man, but for the republic itself. To refuse the pause was to refuse the system, to signal rebellion against the very fabric of civic life. That is why silence became sacred. It held the weight of ritual, of duty, of shared recognition that words, when given air, shape the destiny of nations. Move forward to medieval Europe. In courts and cathedrals, silence was obedience. The Lord spoke, the priest preached, the monarch decreed, and the people fell still. A voice raised against that silence risked more than disapproval. It risked punishment. Yet even under this pressure, the respect pause endured not only from fear but from awe. Humans instinctively know that a room of listening bodies amplifies the voice of the one who speaks. A king shouting to a restless mob is just a man. A king speaking to a silent hall is something closer to myth. Consider indigenous traditions, where silence is not submission but reverence. Among the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, councils began with long pauses, allowing every voice to be heard fully before another began. In many African tribal gatherings, silence after a speaker's words is not empty, it is digestion, respect for the weight of what has been said. To rush into speech would be to trample meaning before it settles. Silence here is not passive. It is active listening, a shared suspension of time so that wisdom can descend. Even in modern life, the respect pause lingers everywhere. Step into a courtroom, the judge enters, and voices vanish, not out of fear of law alone but because centuries of ritual echo through that silence. Watch a university lecture hall, hundreds of restless students hush when the professor begins, the collective pause affirming that knowledge deserves quiet. Even on the most chaotic political stage, where interruptions have become weapons, the moment the crowd actually falls silent carries more power than any roar of applause. It is proof that authority, for a heartbeat, has been recognized. But what happens when the respect pause is broken? Think of parliaments where shouting drowns out the speaker. Think of digital spaces where every voice demands to be heard at once, collapsing into a storm of noise. The effect is chaos, not discourse. Without the silence, words lose their force. They scatter, they blur, they are lost in the din. The respect pause is the dam that makes the river of speech powerful. Without it, you have only floodwaters. Some might argue that silence is submission, a tool of hierarchy that should be abandoned. But silence is not always servitude. It can be chosen freely, as a gesture of dignity. When a crowd listens to a grieving parent speak, when mourners bow their heads at a memorial, when stadiums fall silent before an anthem, that is not oppression, it is collective respect. It is humanity saying, this moment is larger than me, so I will quiet myself to let it pass through us. Yet our era is restless. Phones buzz, attention spans fracture, conversations bleed into one another without pause. The respect pause is endangered, not by tyranny, but by distraction. We no longer honor the silence because we no longer tolerate waiting. But ask yourself, what is lost when everyone talks and no one listens? What truth, what wisdom, what fragile confession dies in the noise because silence was not given room to cradle it? Even now, moments of enforced stillness remind us of its power. Think of a courtroom when the verdict is about to be read. The entire room holds its breath, silence crushing down harder than sound ever could. Think of an auditorium waiting for the first note of a symphony. The hush before the music is part of the music. The silence itself prepares the soul. The oratory respect pause is not obsolete. It is essential. It teaches that listening is not weakness, that attention is not slavery, that silence can be louder than speech. And it challenges us to practice it not only in grand halls, but in our daily lives. When a child struggles to explain their feelings, when a colleague offers an idea, when a friend hesitates before telling a secret. In those moments, the pause is not ceremonial. It is personal. It tells the other, I see you. Your words matter. This ancient rule, older than courts and parliaments, older than kings and microphones, survives because it is stitched into the fabric of human interaction. To pause in respect is to admit we live not only for ourselves but among others, whose voices deserve space. Break that pause too often, and society fragments into static. Honor it, and words once again regain their weight. So the next time silence falls around you when someone speaks, do not mistake it for emptiness. It is a ritual older than law, stronger than punishment, woven through centuries of gatherings. It is the oratory respect pause, the invisible stage upon which every word, every plea, every revelation stands. Without it, no speech can live. With it, even the softest voice can shake the world. Hierarchy door etiquette. Imagine standing at the threshold of a door with someone else. Both of you pause for just a second. It feels awkward, almost comical, but what's really happening in that instant is an ancient ritual replayed in modern skin. Who enters first is not just about convenience, it's about hierarchy. In medieval courts, no servant dared step through a doorway before their lord. Thresholds were lines of power, invisible but charged, and crossing them out of turn could be seen as defiance. Centuries later, in offices, schools, and even at restaurant entrances, the same hidden choreography still lingers. Think about it. When a manager walks with their team toward a meeting room, who touches the handle first? Often it's the subordinate, opening the way like a page boy of the old courts, then stepping aside so the higher-ranking figure passes through. In social etiquette, we dress it as politeness, but beneath that veneer it's still a map of power. The subtle bow is now replaced by a hand on the handle, the yielding step, the glance that says, after you. Without a word, rank is acknowledged, order maintained. These door dances happen everywhere. At universities, students hold doors for professors, rarely the other way around. In law firms, juniors hover by the door while partners stride through. Even at family gatherings, children are taught to wait until elders move first. And though we disguise it as respect, it also encodes dominance. Whoever enters first claims the space, whoever holds back affirms their lower standing. This is why disputes at doors feel so oddly intense. They are small duels for invisible crowns. Two people both insisting, after you, isn't always politeness. It's sometimes a negotiation of who dares to claim authority without saying it aloud. Doors also reveal cultural variations of hierarchy. In Japan, juniors traditionally let seniors enter first as a sign of deference. In the military, the lowest-ranking member often opens the door, but the highest-ranking officer steps through before anyone else. Even in the corporate world, executive suites have double doors or glass partitions not merely for design, but as gateways that reinforce separation. To pass through them without permission is unthinkable. Technology hasn't erased this ritual, it has reshaped it. Automatic doors now make us pause differently, but notice how people still hesitate when walking beside someone of higher status. Security checkpoints and swipe card entries add another layer, almost priestly, deciding who is allowed to cross the invisible boundary. The hesitation at the beep, the subtle yielding of position, all continue the old rite of the threshold. These rituals matter because they shape how authority feels. A boss who waves someone through first rewrites the script, softening the hierarchy. A leader who insists on entering before everyone else hardens it, reminding others of their place. What looks like simple courtesy is, in fact, a mirror of power relations. Doors don't just divide rooms, they divide roles, and every entry or pause signals where each of us stands. So the next time you find yourself hovering in a doorway, watch closely. Are you yielding out of kindness, or out of habit? Are you letting someone pass because you respect them, or because you've been trained to bow without bending? Every door is more than a frame of wood or glass. It is a stage for rank, a test of unspoken order, and a reminder that even in modern life, authority still waits at the threshold. Feast seating command. Picture a grand medieval feast. The torches burn along stone walls, the hall echoes with music, and the long wooden table stretches like a battlefield disguised as dinner. At the head sits the lord or king, framed by banners, his seat elevated just slightly higher than the rest. That chair is not just furniture, it's authority carved in wood. Everyone knows exactly where they belong. To the right and left sit trusted advisors, family, or powerful allies. Further down the line are knights, merchants, guests of lesser rank. By the time you reach the farthest end, you are practically invisible, sipping watered wine and hoping a servant doesn't forget you. This is not simply eating, this is hierarchy turned into architecture. The table is a map of invisible power lines, and your place on it tells the world how much you matter. But the remarkable part is that this ancient code never died. Even today, in boardrooms, weddings, political summits, or family dinners, the ritual survives. Where you sit says who you are. The head of the table still belongs to the person in charge, whether it's a CEO or a patriarch. Sitting beside them signals closeness, trust, influence. Sitting across can mean opposition, challenge, or rivalry. Further down? It's a silent reminder of distance, a ranking no one speaks aloud but everyone feels. The table becomes a stage, and seating is the script of unspoken power. Think of corporate boardrooms. The CEO takes the central position at the long side, often with the best view of the room. To their immediate right and left are the senior decision-makers, those whose voices will be heard first. As the distance grows, so does irrelevance. A junior employee seated at the far edge is unlikely to speak, and if they do, the voice carries less weight. Even in families, this pattern appears. At Thanksgiving or a wedding banquet, grandparents or heads of the family claim the top seats, while children and distant relatives are placed further away. No one explains it, but everyone obeys it. Psychologists call this spatial signaling. Humans use space to mark status. In negotiations, those sitting directly opposite signal confrontation, while those seated side by side signal alliance. That's why world leaders choreograph summit seating down to the centimeter, because a photograph of two presidents sitting across a small table looks like conflict, but sitting side by side at a long one suggests cooperation. Power is not only spoken, it is staged. Consider history's iconic images, the Last Supper, where Christ sits in the central elevated position, flanked by disciples in descending importance. Or Arthur's Round Table, designed specifically to erase the hierarchy of head and foot, an attempt to symbolically flatten power, even though in practice, Arthur's authority still radiated from his place. Even attempts to break the rules prove how deeply ingrained they are. And we still live under these invisible lines today. Imagine walking into a meeting and choosing a random seat at the far end. You may think nothing of it, but the unspoken message is clear. You've placed yourself outside the circle of influence. Now imagine instead sitting directly beside the person in charge. Suddenly, you are part of the inner core, whether or not you've spoken a word. The seat does the talking. The lines of power are drawn in wood and cloth, in how far your chair is from the one that matters. The modern dinner table, too, reflects this. At high-profile events, seating charts are constructed like political documents, balancing rivalries, alliances, and delicate egos. Who sits beside the bride? Who gets exiled to the children's table? These are not accidents. They are negotiations disguised as hospitality. One wrong seat can trigger resentment lasting years. The truth is, humans have always turned meals into rituals of power. Food is survival, and to share it is to bond. But hierarchy seeps in. Who gets served first? Who breaks the bread? Who pours the wine? These gestures, coupled with where one sits, create a language of dominance and submission that operates silently beneath the clinking of cups and the laughter of guests. So the next time you sit at a table, look carefully. Notice who claims the head, who orbits near it, who lingers at the edge. The invisible lines of authority are still there, ancient echoes stretching from medieval feasts to modern conference rooms. We think we are eating, but in truth, we are performing. Every seat is a statement, every placement a verdict. And sometimes, the most powerful thing at a feast is not the crown or the sword, but the chair you choose. Loyalty chain gesture. A handshake looks simple. Two palms meet, fingers curl, a brief squeeze, and it's done. But beneath that tiny gesture is a chain older than contracts, older than ink, older even than writing itself. The handshake is more than a greeting. It is a silent vow, a pledge, a signal of loyalty that has carried weight across centuries. Long before paper agreements, before signatures or seals, men bound their honor with a clasp of hands. And even today, when entire corporations run on signed contracts and digital signatures, one firm grip can still mean more than 100 pages of fine print. Because a contract lives on paper, but a handshake lives in the heart. The origins of this gesture reach back to the ancient world. In Greece, warriors met not with drawn swords but with open palms, proving they carried no hidden weapon. In Rome, statesmen clasped forearms to show trust and equality. It was more than symbolic. It was survival. A hand extended meant peace, and a hand taken meant acceptance. From then on, both parties were bound, not by law but by the invisible thread of loyalty. To break that bond was to be marked forever as untrustworthy, an enemy of honor itself. The handshake was not casual. It was a bloodless oath. Through centuries, this simple act transformed into a universal code. Medieval knights sealed their alliances with handclasps before riding into battle. Traders in distant bazaars struck deals not by signing documents, but by gripping hands in crowded markets, knowing reputation was worth more than parchment. Even pirates, men who lived outside the law, trusted handshakes when dividing plunder or sealing brotherhood. For men without governments, without courts, this gesture was the only contract that mattered. To betray it meant death, not because of legal punishment, but because no one would ever trust you again. And what is a man without trust? The loyalty chain forged by a handshake is something paper cannot replicate. Paper records what is promised. A handshake records who you are. Lawyers can argue contracts. Judges can interpret them. But a handshake is raw, immediate, undeniable. When you clasp another's hand, you are not just agreeing. You are putting your honor on the line. That is why even today, in a world of endless bureaucracy, leaders, business partners, and even rivals still shake hands at the moment of truth. The cameras may capture the treaty signing, but it is the handshake afterward that tells the world, this bond is real. But like all codes, the handshake is double-edged. It can be sacred, but it can also be corrupted. History remembers figures who shook hands in betrayal, who smiled and clasped palms while plotting destruction. Think of politicians who posed in unity only to wage war days later. Think of business leaders who shook hands on a deal, then buried their partners in lawsuits. That is why betrayal of a handshake feels worse than the breaking of a contract. A contract is legal. A handshake is personal. When you break a contract, you lose money. When you break a handshake, you lose your soul. Even in our private lives, the chain of loyalty through a handshake lingers. Sports teams shake hands before and after matches, not because rules demand it, but because it acknowledges a shared code of respect. Children are taught to shake hands when apologizing, because words alone are not enough, the gesture must seal the promise. In politics, a handshake across enemy lines can mean the difference between war and fragile peace. The gesture itself speaks louder than speeches. I trust you, I stand with you, I hold you to your word. In that moment, two people are bound together, not just in flesh, but in expectation. Consider how even the strongest contracts collapse without trust. Corporations sign million-dollar agreements, but often it is the handshake that convinces the parties to sign at all. Soldiers returning from battle clasp hands with their brothers in arms, not because they need proof of loyalty, but because the gesture says what no paper ever could. We survive together, we are bound forever. And when a handshake is refused, when a hand is left hanging in the air, the insult is louder than words. It says, I do not trust you, I do not recognize your honor, I will not be bound to you. The silence of an unaccepted handshake can start wars. The handshake is not just a greeting. It is a relic of humanity's deepest instinct, to test loyalty through touch, to measure honor in skin and bone rather than ink and paper. It is an ancient ritual still alive in every boardroom, every battlefield, every ceremony. When two hands meet, a chain forms, unseen but unbreakable to those who live by honor. And though contracts may fade, though paper may burn, though signatures may be forged, the memory of a handshake lingers in the heart, binding men and women long after the ink has dried. So ask yourself this: in a world drowning in documents, what truly binds us? Is it the contract that can be shredded, or the clasp of hands that leaves no proof but trust itself? And if one day you must choose between the law written in ink and the law sealed by flesh and bone, which chain will you honor, the paper or the handshake? Symbolic dress authority. Clothes are never just clothes. The moment someone steps into a uniform, something shifts in the air. A security guard in a cheap polyester suit suddenly commands attention. A doctor in a white coat radiates authority even if you've never asked for their credentials. A police officer, a priest, a judge, a soldier, all wear garments designed not for comfort but for power. This is symbolic dress authority, the hidden code by which fabric becomes law, stitching becomes legitimacy, and mere appearance bends our behavior before a word is spoken. Think of the courtroom. A black robe is nothing but cloth, yet when a judge enters wearing it, everyone rises. The robe itself does not command, but centuries of symbolism woven into it does. In its folds are the echoes of kings, priests, and ancient magistrates. Without that robe, the same individual might be just another person. But put it on, and the crowd obeys. The garment carries more weight than the body beneath. Uniforms bypass rational thought and trigger instinct. In experiments, people crossing the street obeyed "don't walk" signals far less when following someone in casual clothes, but when the same person wore a business suit, strangers trailed them without hesitation, risking traffic simply because the fabric implied authority. It's the same psychology that makes you trust a lab coat in a commercial or listen more carefully to a firefighter giving directions during chaos. The clothing speaks louder than the voice. Even in modern workplaces, the principle lingers. Airline pilots in crisp jackets with golden stripes look more commanding than any corporate CEO. Fast food employees in coordinated colors appear as representatives of a system bigger than themselves. A waiter in a starched shirt and tie carries more weight than one in plain clothes. The illusion of order and hierarchy is stitched directly into the seams. You aren't just obeying a person, you're obeying the idea that the uniform represents. Consider the military. Rows of soldiers in matching attire erase individuality. Camouflage doesn't just hide, it molds bodies into a single identity. A uniform tells recruits that their personal self is now secondary to the collective. It also tells civilians, you are looking at the state, the nation, the machinery of power, not merely a human being. The same applies to religious garments. A simple robe, a habit, or a turban can transform an individual into a vessel of tradition, making their words carry divine or moral authority. The power of symbolic dress is so deeply ingrained that even counterfeit versions can work. Imposters have walked into hospitals wearing white coats and been trusted as doctors. Fake police officers with second-hand uniforms have controlled crowds. The legitimacy of the garment is so strong that it often overrides suspicion. Our brains are conditioned to read clothing as shorthand for authority, and we obey before we verify. This is why corporations obsess over branding in uniforms. Flight attendants' scarves, luxury hotel staff in tailored suits, tech company employees in identical t-shirts, all create the illusion of unity, reliability, and hierarchy. A uniform flattens differences, erases doubts, and replaces individuality with the weight of an institution. Even in rebellion, clothing becomes authority. Black leather jackets of biker gangs, bandanas of street crews, matching jerseys of athletes. In every case, the garment demands recognition, respect, or fear. And so, whether it is a robe, a suit, a badge, or a simple colored shirt, symbolic dress remains one of humanity's most efficient tools of obedience. You don't have to earn power if you can wear it. Authority is stitched, buttoned, and zipped, and society bows to it before it questions it. Processional Priority Law. Every society has its hidden laws. Not the ones carved into codes or enforced by courts, but the ones written into movement, order, and sequence. One of the strangest, yet most enduring, is the Processional Priority Law, the unwritten command that who walks first, who follows, and who stands behind is not random but political ritual. What began as ancient parade orders still shapes ceremonies of power today, from royal weddings to state funerals, where every step is a message and every placement a verdict on rank. Consider the triumphs of ancient Rome. When victorious generals entered the city, they did not simply march. They performed. The general stood in his chariot, crowned with laurel, behind him the spoils of war, then the prisoners, and finally his own soldiers. The order mattered more than the celebration itself. It declared hierarchy. The conqueror first, the humiliated last. To disrupt that sequence was not merely rude, it was treason against Rome's imagination of itself. The law of processions was invisible but ironclad. Medieval Europe inherited the obsession. Royal entries into cities became theater, choreographed with brutal precision. Kings rode before dukes, dukes before barons, clergy before commoners. In coronations, the sequence of who carried the orb, the sword, or the scepter was fought over like territory. Nobles spilled blood over whether they were entitled to walk a few steps closer to the monarch. Processional order was not courtesy, it was power embodied. To be placed behind another was to be told, publicly, you were less. Church ritual followed the same law. Bishops processed before abbots, priests before deacons, choir boys at the rear. Even in death, funerals obeyed rank, nobles first, peasants last, each body paraded according to a hierarchy that survived beyond life itself. Every procession was a ladder you could not escape, a staircase of bodies showing who ruled and who obeyed. The echoes persist in modern states, often unnoticed because they are dressed as tradition. Watch a political inauguration. The head of state enters last, but this is not tardiness, it is supremacy. By entering last, they command the silence, the attention, the finality. In weddings of royalty, the bride and groom walk in a line determined by centuries of precedence rules, balancing family trees like equations. Even military parades still arrange generals in front, junior officers behind, as if the geometry of walking preserves the logic of war. Think of a presidential motorcade. The armored limousine does not simply appear alone, it is flanked by escorts, trailed by vehicles, a rolling procession where order signals importance. Or consider state funerals. When leaders die, their coffins are followed in exact sequences. Family, heads of state, military officials, citizens. To swap the order would be to rewrite history itself, changing who the world sees as closest, who is honored, who is peripheral. The processional law shapes even the smallest stages of life. In schools, graduation ceremonies imitate it. Professors enter in order of seniority, students line up by degree. Corporate meetings echo it. CEOs speak last, junior staff present first. The pattern holds. Priority in sequence equals priority in power. Even weddings among ordinary people carry the residue. The order of entry, who stands where, who leaves first, all mark unspoken respect. But this law has a darker side. In history, disputes over processional order have sparked riots. In 16th century France, nobles drew swords over whether their family was entitled to march before another during a royal procession. In Byzantium, processional disputes between factions, the blues and greens of the hippodrome, erupted into bloodshed, tearing the city apart. To us, the order of walking may seem trivial, but for them, it was the visible structure of society. To disrupt it was to collapse the world's spine. Even revolutions are staged through processional disruption. When protesters flood streets, they invert the law of order. The powerful are pushed aside, the people march first. When dictators fall, their statues are dragged through the streets in mock processions, reversing the hierarchy. The ruler who once stood first is now paraded last, in chains of stone and mockery. The law of processions, broken, becomes a weapon of rebellion. Psychologists suggest something deeper. Humans are wired to read movement as hierarchy. Even in animals, the leader takes the front, the weak trail behind. Processions tap into this primal instinct, transforming politics into choreography. Our eyes tell us who matters most not by speech, but by where they stand, how they enter, when they are seen. And so, The Processional Priority Law survives because it works. It makes power visible, unquestionable. You do not need to announce who rules when you can show it in the order of walking. It enforces respect without words. It teaches even children to recognize hierarchy long before they can read a constitution. Yet there is danger when the ritual blinds us. When order becomes more important than justice. When societies fight harder over who enters first than over what is being said. Processions can stabilize power, but they can also fossilize it, trapping nations in endless repetition of ceremonial precedents while real crises burn outside. Still, the silence that falls when a procession begins is undeniable. Crowds instinctively obey the rhythm. The flag comes first, the dignitaries follow, the leader arrives last, and for that moment, everyone knows where they stand. The law is ancient, unwritten, but binding. So the next time you watch a state funeral, a graduation, or even a parade, look carefully. The meaning is not only in the speeches, the uniforms, or the flags. It is in the choreography of bodies, the order of steps, the invisible law of who goes first and who goes last. This is the Processional Priority Law, the ancient script of power still performed on our streets. And as long as humans gather in public, as long as leaders crave recognition, this law will remain in force. Not in books, but in footsteps. Not in words, but in silence and movement. Binding oath language. When people think of binding oaths, they imagine parchment scrolls, signatures in ink, and seals pressed into wax. But the truth is, long before lawyers drafted contracts, words alone were chains. A vow spoken in the right place, in the right tone, in front of the right witnesses, was enough to bind a person's life. And even today, in the age of digital agreements and biometric signatures, language still carries that same hidden weight. Phrases slip from our mouths that lock us tighter than any written contract. We don't always realize it, but our bodies and societies do. Consider marriage vows. The words, I do, have no ink behind them, no notary, no formal paper in the moment they're spoken. Yet the simple syllables have carried the power to rearrange property, to change social status, to rewrite inheritance lines for centuries. A whispered yes in a chapel echoes louder than any pen stroke. Or think about the oath of testimony in a courtroom. When a witness says, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, the phrase itself becomes a legal hinge. A lie after that oath can send someone to prison, not because of the word's poetry, but because they are ritualized, binding speech. These are not accidents. Cultures across the world developed formulas of words believed to call down invisible enforcement. In ancient Greece, breaking a sworn oath was thought to summon divine punishment. In medieval Europe, knights swore fealty not on documents, but on swords and relics. In many tribal societies, the spoken promise was sealed with sacred tokens, but the real power lay in the words themselves. To break them wasn't merely betrayal, it was believed to bring sickness, famine, or ruin. Even today, in courts, parliaments, and armies, speech acts are treated as transformations. A general doesn't need a contract to give an order, he needs only the phrase, and the world shifts. Modern life still hides these remnants in plain sight. When you say, I promise, people treat it differently than casual speech. It lingers in memory, attaches moral weight, and if broken, invites consequences. Lost trust, broken relationships, reputational damage. I guarantee, or I swear, functions the same way. In workplaces, someone who says, I give you my word, commits themselves without ever signing a form. The phrase itself becomes a small contract, enforced not by law, but by social expectation and fear of shame. Even business leans on this. Handshake deals, though legally fragile, have shaped entire industries. Billion-dollar partnerships began not with contracts, but with someone saying, you have my word. That phrase carried enough gravity to move armies, to start wars, to secure empires. To this day, in politics, phrases like read my lips, no new taxes, or we will never surrender work as oaths disguised as rhetoric. Breaking them can collapse governments, because audiences still treat the promise as sacred. Language also binds in more subtle ways. Consider customer service scripts. When a representative says, "I assure you," they aren't just calming you, they're pledging corporate credibility. Or think of parenting. "I'll never leave you" is more than comfort, it becomes a foundational contract in a child's mind. Even phrases like, "I'll be there," or "count on me," still function as miniature oaths. They raise the stakes of failure. Religion, law, romance, politics, all continue to revolve around this binding quality of language. Ritualized words create realities. A judge saying, "I now pronounce you guilty," shifts a life instantly. A priest saying, "You are absolved," erases sins in the believer's eyes. These aren't metaphors, they are social and psychological transformations triggered by utterances. Words don't just describe, they perform. And in an age of AI, texts, and endless disclaimers, the hunger for binding words is greater than ever. People still want the weight of a promise, the chill of an oath, the reassurance that words can still mean something irreversible. That's why phrases like, "on my mother's life," "cross my heart," or "so help me God" survive. They tap into that ancient fear, that to speak is to conjure, to pledge is to bind, and to break is to curse oneself. So the next time someone says, "I promise," or "trust me," remember, you are not just hearing breath and sound. You are witnessing a ritual older than law itself, one that has toppled kings, sworn armies, married strangers, and condemned innocents. The paper contract may be modern, but the spell of words remains eternal. In every whispered vow, every shouted pledge, every soft assurance, the old power lives on. Gift-giving obligation. Imagine someone hands you a gift. A wrapped box, a bouquet, an envelope with money inside. On the surface, it seems like generosity, something free, given without strings. But beneath that bright paper lies an older, deeper law, the law of obligation. To receive is never neutral. To take is to enter into a contract, whether spoken or not. The object itself becomes a silent demand. One day, you will have to return the gesture, and perhaps not on equal terms. In ancient societies, this was understood with absolute clarity. The gift was never just a gift, it was a bond. Among the Maori of New Zealand, the spirit of the gift, called the hau, was believed to remain with the recipient until it was given back. To keep a gift without returning was to offend the spirit, to invite misfortune. In medieval courts, kings and lords gave jewelry, land, or fine clothes not out of generosity, but to secure loyalty. Once you wore the lord's chain, you owed him your service. Once you took his coin, you carried his mark. Even in Homer's epics, warriors exchanged armor not simply for friendship, but for permanent debts of loyalty that shaped the tides of war. The gift was power disguised as kindness. Fast forward to today, and we like to pretend the ritual has softened. Birthdays, weddings, holidays, we give, we smile, we say, "You didn't have to." But we all know the truth. If someone gives you an expensive present, you feel pressure. Not just to say thank you, but to eventually equal the gesture. If they remember your birthday and you forget theirs, shame weighs heavier than gratitude. If a boss gives you a bonus wrapped as generosity, you know that loyalty is expected in return. Even at the smallest scale, when a friend buys you coffee unasked, you feel a little tug. Next time, it's on you. Psychologists call this the reciprocity norm. It is one of the oldest and most universal rules in human society. We are wired to repay kindness, to balance the scales. To refuse a gift can be insulting, but to accept one means carrying invisible weight. Think about weddings. A couple receives dozens of presents, sometimes thousands of dollars in value. Everyone calls it celebration, but each gift also creates a ledger. Someday, you will attend their weddings, their anniversaries, their family events, and return the favor. What appears as joy is also an economy of exchange, with memory as its currency. And sometimes, this debt is not innocent at all. History is full of rulers who weaponized gifts. Conquerors offered gold and trinkets to local leaders, knowing that once they accepted, they were bound in obligation. Refusing would have been hostile, but accepting was submission. Mafia bosses perfected the same art. They give protection, money, or favors, but the price comes later, when you are forced to repay in ways you cannot refuse. Even in politics today, campaign donors, lobbyists, and foreign dignitaries know that every gift plants a seed of demand. Nothing given is ever free. Even within families, the cycle of obligation spins. Parents give children life, shelter, food, education, and as they age, the weight of repayment shifts onto the child. In some cultures, filial piety is codified as law. To receive is to owe forever. The child who resists is labeled ungrateful, dishonorable. Here, the gift of life itself becomes the heaviest chain of all. What makes this fascinating and terrifying is that the obligation of the gift often grows larger than the gift itself. A small favor can demand an enormous repayment. One act of generosity can bind someone for life. And because the demand is unspoken, it is inescapable. You cannot argue against it without seeming selfish or dishonorable. The gift places you in a cage built of gratitude and expectation. This is why some people feel uneasy with receiving. That awkwardness when handed a surprise gift? It's not just shyness, it's the subconscious recognition that your freedom just narrowed. That now, in the invisible economy of human exchange, you are in debt. Anthropologists studying tribes across the world found the same pattern. Gifting was often more dangerous than trading. A trade is closed, balanced. A gift lingers. It hovers. It waits. So when we say, it's the thought that counts, we are speaking a half-truth. Yes, it is the thought, but also the demand hidden inside it. Every present is a promise waiting to be called in. Every gift is a thread binding giver and receiver in a web of expectation. The next time someone hands you a gift, ask yourself, what did I just accept? Was it kindness? Was it love? Or was it a contract, one whose terms have not yet been spoken? Because history whispers the same answer across every culture, the gift is never free. Token of truce, a token can look harmless. A branch of olive, a white flag, a feather, a cup, a loaf of bread. But these objects have carried the weight of life and death for thousands of years. They are not just items, they are signals, ancient codes of survival, and the heart of something older than diplomacy itself, the token of truce. Long before written treaties or peace accords, human beings relied on symbols to cross the line between hostility and trust. A soldier stepping out of his fort, holding nothing but a branch. A messenger sent into enemy camps, bearing a sacred object. These were not casual gestures. They were shields stronger than armor, because everyone knew what they meant. I come in peace, and for now, blood must stop flowing. The origins of this ritual reach so far back that they blur into myth. The olive branch of ancient Greece, offered to declare surrender or friendship. The white cloth raised during Roman battles, signaling that words would replace weapons. Among Native American tribes, the passing of a pipe carried the same gravity. It was not tobacco that was shared, but a bond that no arrow was meant to break. Across cultures and continents, enemies learned that certain tokens could halt the storm of violence, if only for a moment. A simple exchange, recognized by both sides, became a fragile bridge across the abyss of war. But why tokens? Why not simply words? Because words can lie. Words can be twisted, forgotten, denied. A token, on the other hand, is tangible. To extend one is to make yourself vulnerable. Imagine walking toward an enemy line unarmed, holding out a symbol. It is not just a gift, it is a gamble. Your life rests on their willingness to honor the code. And that vulnerability is precisely what makes the gesture powerful. The token of truce is not just a sign, it is a risk, and therefore, a proof of sincerity. To kill the bearer of a token is not simply murder. It is sacrilege, a crime against the invisible law that even enemies recognize. This ritual has shaped history. In medieval Europe, rival kings would exchange hostages, often their own sons, as living tokens of truce. The message was clear: I trust you with my blood, because I believe you will honor peace. Among the Vikings, weapons were sometimes buried during feasts of negotiation, symbolizing that fighting was forbidden while bread and ale were shared. In Asia, emissaries carried golden plaques or sacred seals into foreign courts, objects that guaranteed safe passage even through hostile lands. The truce token became so sacred that violating it was seen as monstrous, a stain that could not be washed away. The betrayal of a token often echoed for generations, turning single acts into legends of treachery. Yet tokens are not relics of the past. They still live among us, disguised but recognizable. The exchange of gifts between nations, be it swords, scrolls, or ceremonial keys, continues the same tradition. When two presidents shake hands and swap tokens, whether it's soil from a battlefield or a carved symbol of culture, they are enacting the ancient ritual, declaring, "We are not enemies here." For this moment, the ground is sacred. Even in our personal lives, the practice lingers. A bottle of wine brought to a neighbor. A peace offering of flowers after a fight. A symbolic gift at the end of a bitter feud. These gestures, however small, descend from the same ancient code. But like all codes, this one is fragile. The power of a token depends entirely on belief. Once people stop respecting the symbol, it loses its magic. A white flag ignored becomes nothing but fabric. A gift poisoned by hidden intentions turns peace into mockery. And history is full of such betrayals. The Trojan horse, presented as a gift but hiding destruction. Treaties sealed with symbolic objects, only to be broken the moment the enemy turned their back. When the token fails, it does not just break trust, it teaches both sides that peace itself is an illusion. And when that lesson spreads, wars grow bloodier, because the ancient bridge of trust has been burned. The haunting truth is that tokens of truce reveal both the best and worst of humanity. They show our desperate longing to end violence, our instinct to find a language beyond weapons. But they also expose how fragile trust is, how easily it can be shattered by deceit. Every symbolic exchange is a test, of honor, of restraint, of humanity itself. To accept a token is to admit that your enemy is still human. To betray it is to admit that you are not. Even today, when armies negotiate ceasefires, the ritual remains. Humanitarian convoys marked with red crosses. Neutral flags waved on battlefields. The exchange of prisoners. The gestures evolve, but the principle stays the same. When the world drowns in violence, sometimes the smallest object can carry the heaviest weight. Not because of what it is, but because of what it means. So the next time you see a gift exchanged between rivals, a symbol passed between hands that once carried weapons, remember this. You are witnessing one of humanity's oldest survival codes. The token of truce. An object that holds no power on its own, until men and women decide to honor it. And then, for one fragile moment, war pauses, and peace breathes. Harvest festival economy. Markets do not run only on money. They run on rhythm, on cycles of feast and scarcity, on the pulse of rituals that stretch back to when people first gathered harvests from the soil. Even today, the logic of ancient harvest festivals lingers in how economies move. Prices rise and fall with seasons of celebration. Demand surges not only because people need goods, but because tradition tells them to gather, to exchange, to give. This is the harvest festival economy, the invisible tether between ritual celebration and modern markets. Think back to agrarian societies. When crops were finally pulled from the fields, the community erupted into festivals. These were not just about gratitude or worship, they were economic resets. Farmers who had no currency traded grain, meat, cloth. Villagers bought tools, spices, and luxuries they had waited all year to afford. The harvest season became the shopping season. And this pattern has never truly ended. Look at the modern world. Black Friday in the United States, Diwali in India, Lunar New Year in China, Christmas across the West, each is timed to coincide with or echo ancient cycles of abundance. They are marketed as religious or cultural events, but economically they function like harvest festivals. Stores prepare months in advance. Entire industries structure their supply chains to peak during these periods. The harvest may no longer be wheat or rice, but the rhythm is the same. Goods are gathered, exchanged, and consumed in bursts that define the year's prosperity. Consider how prices shift. Before festivals, demand climbs, jewelry before Diwali, electronics before Christmas, clothing before Eid. Sellers raise prices in anticipation, then slash them in orchestrated discounts that still ensure higher profit from sheer volume. What looks like generosity is an economic pattern as old as village fairs. The excitement of a festival suspends rational spending. People save all year only to release everything in one frenzy of buying. This cycle doesn't just move money, it stabilizes entire economies, creating predictable seasons of consumption. Even small-scale communities show the same effect. Farmers' markets swell in autumn. Rural fairs coincide with harvest months. Tourist towns orient their local economies around seasonal festivals that attract buyers from afar. A pumpkin patch in October or a cherry blossom festival in spring doesn't just sell produce, it sells experience, tradition, and identity. These gatherings trigger spending beyond necessity. People purchase not just food but symbols of belonging. The harvest festival economy also explains why global corporations borrow cultural calendars. Tech companies time new phone launches before holidays. Film studios release blockbusters in festive months. Online retailers flood inboxes with seasonal offers that mimic the ancient urgency of fleeting harvests. They understand the psychology. People feel most compelled to buy when the world around them is decorated, when rituals of celebration are in the air, when scarcity and abundance are framed as part of tradition. This cycle is not without cost. Just as ancient villages could fall into debt after festivals, modern consumers too often overspend, leaving long shadows of repayment after the glow of lights has faded. Yet the cycle continues, because it binds together economy and culture. A festival without buying feels incomplete, and an economy without festivals feels lifeless. The two sustain each other. What began as a celebration of crops has become the engine of global capitalism. The logic is the same. Gather, exchange, celebrate, and reset. Every festival is still a harvest festival, whether we are feasting on grain, on gadgets, or on glittering illusions of abundance. And every economy is still a harvest economy, measured not just in profit, but in the pulse of celebrations that guide our hands to give, to spend, and to obey the ancient rhythm of buying in season. Protectorate responsibility rule. Every society has warriors, guardians, defenders. But behind the shield and the sword lies a deeper truth. Those who defend a group do not simply protect it, they own it. The Protectorate responsibility rule is ancient, buried beneath myths of honor and service. It says that the one who defends becomes the one who decides. That protection, offered freely or demanded by force, creates invisible political power stronger than any crown. People hand over obedience to the one they believe stands between them and destruction. Look back to the earliest tribes. Hunters who guarded the fire, warriors who drove away predators, did more than keep danger at bay. They became indispensable. To question them was to risk the tribe's survival. Slowly, defenders became chiefs, leaders, kings. Their authority was not written in law but in fear and gratitude. To defend is to control. To shield others is to make them dependent on your shield. And once dependence grows, power flows with it. Consider ancient Greece. Hoplites formed the phalanx, shields interlocked, spears outward. Each citizen soldier was equal in theory, but those who led the front ranks held influence beyond the battlefield. Their courage translated into political weight. They could claim, I bled for this city, therefore I deserve to shape its fate. The defense of the group became a currency, and it bought power more reliably than gold. Rome elevated this rule to law. Generals who defended the Republic against foreign armies returned not just with victory, but with legions loyal to them personally. Julius Caesar did not conquer Rome by words alone. His soldiers had followed him through mud, hunger, and blood, and when he crossed the Rubicon, it was not merely one man defying the Senate. It was the protector bringing his dependents to claim what he believed was his due. Protection had morphed into ownership. Responsibility had hardened into rule. Medieval Europe wore the Protectorate responsibility rule on its banners. Lords swore to defend peasants from raiders, bandits, rival armies. In return, peasants owed labor, taxes, loyalty. I protect, therefore I command. Castles rose not as homes but as symbols. Live under my walls, safe from fire and sword, and your obedience is the price. The Church sanctified this with the idea of divine guardianship, binding soldiers into holy orders where defense of the faith justified power over the faithful. Knights did not simply serve. They ruled through the logic of the shield. Even outside Europe, the same rule applied. Samurai in Japan were protectors of their domains, yet their loyalty to the daimyo was matched by the peasants' dependence on them. In Africa, warrior societies like the Zulus' impis transformed from defenders into instruments of centralized power. In every culture, those who could promise safety gained the leverage to demand obedience. But here is the paradox. Protection is never neutral. To defend a group is to decide what counts as danger. Who defines the threat controls the narrative. Leaders throughout history have exploited this, magnifying dangers, real or imagined, to tighten their grip. Only I can keep you safe is the oldest political promise, and the most dangerous. Whether it was emperors pointing to barbarians, monarchs pointing to heretics, or modern states pointing to terrorists, the protector claims a monopoly on safety. And safety is the one thing no group can refuse. Look at the modern world, and the rule still breathes. Military juntas seize power under the pretext of protecting the nation. Police forces expand authority when framed as the shield against chaos. Leaders who position themselves as defenders, against foreign powers, against economic collapse, against disease, gain extraordinary legitimacy. They may fail in every other arena, but as long as people believe they are the bulwark against destruction, they hold the hidden scepter. Even in smaller spaces, this rule plays out. In gangs, the one who shields members from rival violence becomes the unquestioned boss. In schools, the kid who stands up to bullies gains quiet authority over those he saved. In workplaces, the manager who takes blame from higher-ups becomes the one workers turn to, giving them informal power even if their official rank is low. The dynamic repeats endlessly. Protect, and you rule. But the Protectorate responsibility rule is a double-edged sword. Fail to protect, and the same group that granted loyalty will withdraw it with fury. History is littered with rulers overthrown because they failed at their one true responsibility. When the walls fall, when the invaders breach the gates, when the promised shield cracks, the protector becomes the betrayer. Gratitude turns to rage. Leaders who rise on the promise of defense are also destroyed by it. And yet, the instinct remains. In times of peace, citizens may question, argue, rebel. But the moment crisis strikes, eyes turn instinctively to whoever promises safety. Authority collapses back into hierarchy of protection. The parent over the child, the soldier over the civilian, the state over the people. It is not logic. It is survival written into the human animal. So the Protectorate responsibility rule is not a relic. It is the heartbeat of politics, from ancient tribes to nuclear nations. It explains why armies topple governments, why presidents swell their powers during war, why those who claim to shield the group always rise, whether by respect or fear. And it warns us that power offered in the name of safety rarely returns once the threat fades. Protection hardens into domination. Guardianship drifts into control. The next time you hear a leader speak of threats, of danger, of enemies waiting beyond the gates, listen closely. Behind those words is an ancient bargain. Give me your loyalty, and I will keep you safe. But hidden in that bargain is the law of all protectorates. The one who defends is the one who decides. And once you depend on the shield, it may never let you go. Condolence Protocol. Grief is timeless, but so are the rules that shape how we show it. Long before psychologists named the stages of mourning, ancient societies carved out scripts for what you could and could not do when death touched your life. And though centuries have passed, those unwritten instructions still linger in the way we speak, the way we dress, and even in the silences we share. What we call condolence today is not simply kindness, it is the continuation of ritual, ancient etiquette resurfacing in modern clothes. Think about the words we reach for when someone loses a loved one. We say, "I'm sorry for your loss," as if reading from an invisible script. It sounds natural, automatic, yet it is not new. In Rome, mourners were expected to utter formulaic phrases, expressions of pity or solidarity, repeated across generations until they hardened into tradition. In Victorian England, families mailed black-edged cards with standardized condolences, almost identical from house to house. Today, we send texts, emails, or sympathy cards, but the core remains the same. Language stripped of improvisation, chosen not to express originality but to show we understand the ritual. Clothing carries another echo. Black as the color of mourning is so ingrained that people wear it without thinking why. In medieval Europe, widows were expected to dress in black for months or years, announcing grief with every garment. In Japan, white once played the same role, a color of purity and passing. Even now, when you attend a funeral, you choose muted colors instinctively. It feels like respect, but it is also obedience to centuries-old codes telling us that the body must advertise its grief for others to properly respond. Silence itself is part of the protocol. In many cultures, mourners are not supposed to speak first. Others approach them gently, offering words, waiting for acknowledgement. That pattern survives in modern wakes and hospital visits. People lower their voices, soften their footsteps, stand a little farther back, all without conscious thought. The hush is not accidental, it is etiquette, a remnant of ancient fears that noise might disturb the soul's passage or offend the gods watching over death. Even the act of bringing food to grieving families is ritual. In ancient Greece, mourners were fed by their neighbors to symbolize that life continued even when one household was shattered. Today, casseroles and meal trains fill the same function. It is less about nourishment than about carrying someone through the days when appetite collapses. The food says, "You are still part of us, and we will carry the weight you cannot." Notice also how condolences enforce boundaries of time. In many cultures, there is a designated mourning period. 7 days of Shiva in Jewish tradition, 40 days in parts of the Orthodox world, a year of black in Victorian England. Even now, people instinctively ask, "How long has it been?" when someone brings up a loss, as though trying to measure whether the grief is still permitted to dominate conversation. We inherited this sense of a clock on sorrow. Too soon and silence is cruel. Too late and speech feels intrusive. Modern workplaces replicate these codes in sterile ways. Bereavement leave is nothing but ritualized mourning protocol written into corporate policy. A fixed number of days for tears, then a return to productivity. The coldness shocks us, but it is simply another version of what older societies demanded. Grieve here, for this long, in this manner, and then resume your role. Society's machine tolerates grief only if it follows protocol. Even in digital life, condolence etiquette thrives. On social media, people flood timelines with phrases like "rest in peace," "sending prayers," or simply emojis, flowers, candles, folded hands. These are the new mourning badges, the modern black armbands. Comment sections become public vigils, where the performance of grief is both sincere and formulaic. Stray too far, make a joke, share something unrelated too soon, and you risk social punishment. The rules have not vanished, they've migrated into pixels. What's striking is how deeply these rituals shape not only the mourner, but the community. Condolence is not for the dead, it is for the living, a signal that loss is recognized, that grief is contained within the tribe. Without it, mourning can turn into exile. That is why people fear being forgotten more than being remembered with cliché words. Even a formulaic "sorry for your loss" is a thread holding them inside the fabric of society. So when you bow your head at a funeral, when you choose black clothes, when you send a short, stiff phrase that has been used a million times before, you are not failing to be original. You are carrying out an ancient duty. Condolence is not improvisation. It is ritual survival. It tells the grieving, "You are not alone, you are not outside, you are still one of us." And in that sense, the protocol is not a cage but a lifeline, binding grief to community so that one heart's silence does not become a permanent exile. Because beneath every whispered condolence lies a truth. Death isolates, but ritual restores. And the etiquette of mourning, however old, however repetitive, is the bridge that keeps us human when loss threatens to break us apart. Signature authority myth. Picture the moment a pen touches paper. The ink flows, a name takes shape, and suddenly a mark transforms a blank page into something more. That stroke of handwriting seems simple, yet it carries a force that feels almost magical. For centuries, to sign your name was not just to identify yourself, but to command reality. Contracts bound, land transferred, treaties sealed, lives changed forever, all by the movement of a hand. The signature became more than a mark, it became authority itself. In medieval Europe, kings and nobles guarded their signatures as fiercely as their crowns. A wax seal pressed with a signet ring carried the same power as the ruler's presence. To forge it was treason, punishable by death. In ancient China, the brushstrokes of a scholar's name were considered sacred expressions of his soul. To reproduce them without permission was an attack on his identity. Across cultures, to sign was to declare ownership, to impose will, to make words flesh. But here is the paradox: even when no law enforces it, the signature still carries weight. Think about a child writing their name on a school desk, or carving initials into a tree. There is no legal claim, no contract, yet the act feels like a declaration. This is mine, this space, this memory, this piece of the world. Graffiti works the same way. A name scrawled on a wall doesn't transfer property rights, but it asserts presence. It shouts, "I was here." Authority is not just legal, it is psychological. We treat signatures as marks of ownership even when they have no formal power. Consider art. A painting unsigned feels incomplete, anonymous, stripped of its soul. Add a name at the bottom corner, and suddenly it belongs. The signature alone can multiply its value 1,000 times. A canvas without a name might be decoration, but one with Picasso scrawled across it becomes priceless. The ink is worth more than the paint. The name is ownership, legacy, immortality. Even when fakes are exposed, the desire for the real signature reveals how much we equate the mark with truth, even when reality resists. In everyday life, the ritual persists. Signing a guest book at a wedding, a memorial, or a hotel is not about legality, it's about presence. The act itself says, "I was part of this. I belong to this moment." At protests, people scrawl their names on banners or petitions not only to signal agreement, but to anchor themselves in the unfolding story. We still believe in the myth that writing your name is more than ink, that it seals something invisible but binding. Even in the digital world, where handwritten signatures have been replaced by typed names and electronic checkboxes, the symbolism survives. We click "I agree" with the same gravity as a pen stroke, even though most never read the terms. A typed name in an email carries the same finality, signed, John. And when we use a digital signature or a stylus on a screen, it is not the squiggle itself that holds legal weight, but the ritual of making it. The myth continues, adapted for new tools, but no less powerful. Why does this myth endure? Because a signature is not just a mark of ownership, it is a fragment of identity. It represents the self distilled into lines, unique and personal. That is why forgers chase perfection, why collectors prize autographs, why people still practice their signature as though it were a performance. It is both mask and mirror, the part of us we show the world, and the stamp that binds us to things we may never control. But here lies the haunting truth. We believe in signatures even when the law does not. A name carved into a park bench is treated as territory. A famous person's autograph on a napkin is treasured as if it carries their essence. We obey the myth instinctively, as if some ancient part of us still believes in the magic of names. To write your name is to declare, "This piece of reality bends toward me. It is mine." So the next time you sign, whether a check, a document, or a wall, remember what you are really doing. You are invoking one of the oldest human myths, that a few strokes of ink can turn nothing into something, presence into permanence, a moment into eternity. The law may enforce it, or not. But the myth of signature authority is older, deeper, and more unshakable than any legal code. Because long before courts and contracts, humans believed one thing, that to write your name was to make the world obey. Harbor entry rights. Picture a ship approaching a foreign harbor. It sails heavy with salt wind, its crew exhausted, its hull groaning with cargo. The real danger is not the sea behind them, it is the shore ahead. Because docking is never guaranteed. To enter another's harbor is to seek permission, to request trust, to expose yourself to the power of those who control the gates. From ancient times until now, harbor entry has never been just about ships and docks. It has been about diplomacy, survival, and sovereignty. A ship that enters without consent is not a guest. It is an invader. And that unspoken truth still shapes the way nations treat one another today. In the ancient world, harbors were lifelines. A city might survive famine, siege, or plague, but if its harbor fell, its lifeblood was cut. Merchants understood this well. Before dropping anchor, they had to signal their intentions, sometimes with flags, sometimes with messengers, sometimes with ritual gifts. The Phoenicians, masters of the sea, respected this code. Greek city-states demanded tribute before foreign traders could dock. Even the Romans, with all their might, kept strict laws. Unauthorized entry into a Roman port was not commerce, it was piracy. These customs were more than rules of trade. They were acts of diplomacy. To dock was to declare yourself under the host's authority, to place your ship, and your men, at their mercy. But harbor entry was not only about goods. It was about honor. A ship allowed into a harbor without challenge meant that the visitor was trusted, respected, or feared. A ship refused meant humiliation, a mark that could spark conflict. Whole wars have begun over blocked harbors. The Peloponnesian War dragged Athens and Sparta into chaos in part because of who controlled docking rights. Centuries later, the British Empire used gunboat diplomacy to force ports open across Asia and Africa, turning harbor entry into a weapon. To let ships dock was to accept their presence. To deny them was to defy their power. The rituals of docking shaped diplomacy in subtle ways. In medieval Europe, docking rights were wrapped in ceremony. Foreign ships had to strike their sails as a sign of submission before entering a king's harbor. They might pay a fee, unload tribute, or offer gifts to local officials. These acts were not just economic, they were symbolic acknowledgments of sovereignty. Even today, echoes of these practices remain. Think of modern customs checks, tariffs, quarantine inspections. They are bureaucratic descendants of those ancient rituals, reminders that entry into another's territory is a privilege, not a right. Yet harbor entry has always been double-edged. On one hand, it can be a gesture of welcome, a sign of peace. On the other, it can be a chokehold, a way to control, humiliate, or provoke. Consider the Opium Wars, where China's refusal to grant harbor rights to British traders led to brutal conflict. Or the American Revolution, where Britain's restrictions on colonial shipping fueled rebellion. Harbors are not just docks, they are gates of power. And whoever controls the gates controls the future. Even in modern times, the principle lives on. Naval treaties, international waters, and docking agreements are all rooted in the same idea. You cannot simply enter where you please. Warships today must request permission before docking in foreign ports. Humanitarian vessels need clearance before unloading aid. Diplomatic tensions often flare when ships are denied access, because the denial is more than logistical, it is political theater. When a country says, "Your ship cannot enter here," what it truly says is, "We do not recognize your standing." And when it grants entry, it is offering something more valuable than docking space, legitimacy. In our daily lives, we rarely think of harbors. But the same principle plays out in every threshold we cross. To enter someone's home, you knock. To join a private group, you ask. To cross a border, you show a passport. These rituals are the landlocked descendants of ancient harbor codes. They remind us that every entry, whether by sea or by step, is not a right but a negotiation. Permission granted binds us to courtesy. Permission denied tests our patience. And our pride. The truth is this, the world's oceans are vast, but safe harbor is rare. That rarity has always made docking rights more than practical. They are political, emotional, even spiritual. They can mean survival for sailors, wealth for merchants, or war for nations. And though we now live in a world of treaties and international law, the ancient instinct remains. When a ship approaches the shore, eyes turn to the harbor. Will the gates open? Or will they close? Will the vessel be welcomed, or will it be turned away? Because in the end, a harbor is not just a place. It is a statement. To grant entry is to acknowledge, to honor, to trust. To deny it is to challenge, to provoke, to declare. This shore is ours, and you are not welcome. And as long as ships sail, That ancient code of harbor entry will continue to shape the fate of nations. Secret keeper hierarchy. Secrets are not just whispers, they are weapons. In every society, from ancient tribes to modern corporations, the person who controls information controls the flow of power. It does not matter if they hold wealth, rank, or even physical strength. What they know, and what they choose not to share, places them above others. This is the secret keeper hierarchy, an invisible chain of dominance built not on open commands but on hidden knowledge. Imagine the court of a medieval king. Nobles wore jewels, knights carried swords, but the real authority often sat in the shadows. The advisor who knew the king's doubts, the confessor who knew his sins, the messenger who intercepted letters. Their influence was not written into titles, but whispered in secrets. To reveal too much could end their position. To withhold gave them leverage. Information was their crown, silence their throne. The same dynamic appears in families. A child who overhears a parent's argument wields quiet power, deciding whether to expose it or keep it locked away. A sibling who guards another's misstep gains an unspoken upper hand. In workplaces, the employee who knows the boss's private frustrations or who has insider knowledge of upcoming layoffs suddenly stands above peers, even if their official rank is lower. Everyone else is waiting in the dark, while the secret keeper navigates with a lantern. History is full of this hierarchy shaping destinies. Spies have toppled empires not with armies but with guarded fragments of truth. Courtiers destroyed rivals by whispering what they had seen behind closed doors. Priests secured obedience by hearing confessions, binding people through the power of withheld absolution. In every case, the secret itself was less important than the control it granted. Those who knew dictated the pace, those who didn't could only react. Even in everyday life, secrecy creates dominance. Consider school children. The one who knows a scandal, a crush, or a teacher's hidden habit can shift the balance of the group. Entire social circles rearrange around who knows what and who fears being exposed. Gossip is not idle chatter, it is the currency of power. And those who hold it decide who rises and who falls. Corporations thrive on this same hierarchy. Executives guard mergers, policies, and financial truths, releasing them strategically to manipulate markets. Political parties conceal negotiations until the moment of advantage. Governments classify documents, not always for national safety but for control of narrative. Information becomes a weaponized scarcity. To have it when others do not is to stand above them, silently dictating their choices. Psychologically, the effect is primal. People instinctively defer to those who seem in the know. We equate knowledge with competence, secrecy with authority. The guarded silence of a leader often intimidates more than loud declarations. A secret keeper commands respect without raising their voice because everyone else suspects they hold something that could change everything. But there is danger in this hierarchy. To hold secrets is to carry both dominance and isolation. Many who rose on hidden knowledge also fell when those secrets escaped their grasp. From Watergate to whistleblowers, the collapse of power often comes when secrets slip into the open, destroying not just reputations but entire structures built on silence. What once made someone untouchable suddenly makes them vulnerable. And yet, the pattern never disappears. In homes, schools, businesses, and nations, people who hold secrets still shape behavior without needing a crown, badge, or title. They sit quietly above the rest, not because of what they show, but because of what they hide. The secret keeper hierarchy endures because human beings instinctively bend to those who possess the unknown. Knowledge is power, yes, but withheld knowledge is dominance. Dual reputation remnant. The duel was supposed to die centuries ago. Pistols at dawn, swords at dusk, gentlemen demanding satisfaction with cold steel and steady nerves. Laws outlawed it, courts condemned it, churches cursed it. Yet the duel never really vanished. Its form changed, its weapons shifted, but the remnant survives, in every public confrontation that still decides private honor. This is the dual reputation remnant, the ghost of an old ritual still shaping how we defend dignity today. In the past, the duel was a deadly contract. Two men clashed not over land or money but over words, insults, and reputation. An accusation of cowardice, a whisper of betrayal, a glance taken as disrespect, such slights could not be left unanswered. For in societies built on fragile honor, reputation was life itself. A man who accepted insult without reply was dead already, his standing erased, his voice mocked. The duel gave him a way to prove worth with blood. Europe's nobility carried this tradition to extremes. In France, thousands of men perished in duels over trifles as minor as spilled wine or mocking jokes. The duel was not about the cause, it was about the stage. The public watched, or at least heard, and judged. Victory or honorable death preserved reputation. Survival without resistance was disgrace. In Britain, even members of Parliament met on lonely fields with pistols. In America, Alexander Hamilton's life ended in a duel with Aaron Burr, not for politics alone, but because honor demanded the confrontation. Yet as nations grew tired of losing leaders and sons to pride, the duel was outlawed. Kings banned it. Courts punished it. The Enlightenment mocked it as barbarism. But here is the secret: the duel was never erased, only transformed. The ritual survives as the reputation remnant, a deep expectation that private honor must still be defended in public. Watch a modern street fight that begins not with blows, but with words. One man insults another. The insult lingers. If unanswered, it brands the victim as weak, submissive, dishonored. The punch, reckless as it may be, restores balance. The crowd records on phones, uploading to millions, multiplying the witnesses. Reputation, once measured in whispers, now spreads across the digital stage. The duel has simply moved platforms. Look at politics. Leaders insult one another on live television, calling rivals liars, weaklings, traitors. These are not reasoned debates, they are duels fought with language. The one who responds swiftly, sharply, and without backing down emerges as the victor, his reputation reinforced. The one who falters, stammers, or stays silent suffers humiliation before the crowd. It is not about truth. It is about honor. The duel continues, with cameras as pistols. Even in business, the duel remnant thrives. Executives clash in boardrooms, professors spar at conferences, celebrities fire shots at each other online. Each confrontation is staged for the public. Each is less about the actual issue than about the performance of dominance. Followers, fans, allies, all become the audience who decides who defended their honor and who lost it. And on social media, the duel has mutated into something even sharper. Callouts, feuds, clapbacks, these are duels fought in digital arenas, with likes and retweets as weapons. One wrong insult can spark a chain of public responses, escalating until one side is shamed into retreat. No blood is spilled, but reputations bleed. A viral humiliation can end careers faster than a bullet ever could. The crowd does not gather at dawn by a riverbank, it gathers online, global, relentless, demanding to see who stands and who falls. Psychologists explain why this persists. Human beings are wired to protect status in groups, because status once meant survival. To be dishonored was to lose trust, resources, allies. Thus, the instinct to defend reputation in public still burns in us. The weapons change, but the drive remains. A teenager fighting in a schoolyard, a politician snapping back in debate, an influencer destroying a rival with a single post, all are obeying the old law: honor must be defended, and only confrontation proves worth. But this remnant has its dangers. Duels once killed men outright. Today, they destroy reputations, families, sometimes lives, when humiliation drives despair. And just as in the past, many duels erupt over trivial sparks, a misinterpreted word, a careless joke, a comment taken the wrong way. The remnant cares little for justice or fairness. It demands spectacle, proof, performance. Yet it also carries strange power. When used with discipline, confrontation can restore dignity, signal boundaries, even deter aggression. A well-timed public defense can save a leader's credibility, protect a community, or remind the world that dignity still matters. But unchecked, the duel remnant becomes endless escalation, where every insult must be met, every slight answered, until all that remains is noise, conflict without resolution. The duel never died because honor never died. The battlefield has shifted from fields of pistols to stages, cameras, and screens, but the law is the same. The crowd is watching, and silence is surrender. The dual reputation remnant whispers that dignity is fragile, that respect must be won and defended in public, that sometimes words wound deeper than swords. So the next time you see two rivals clash in politics, two celebrities feud online, or even two strangers argue on the street while others gather to watch, remember, you are witnessing an ancient ritual reborn. The duel has not ended. It lingers in every confrontation where pride is tested before witnesses. It lingers in the remnant of honor that still rules us. And in every society, as long as reputation matters more than reason, the duel will never truly be gone. Mediation circle order. The order of voices matters more than most people realize. In a negotiation, in a meeting, in any circle where conflict seeks resolution, the first words are not just sounds, they are architecture. They build the frame into which every other voice must fit. Across history, who speaks first has been treated with the reverence of ritual, because the opening position can tilt the entire balance of power before the second voice even arrives. Think of tribal councils. In many indigenous traditions, the elder speaks first, not only to share wisdom, but to set the tone. Their words are like the stones laid for the circle itself, steady, immovable, impossible to ignore. In medieval courts, when disputes were mediated before a king or magistrate, protocol dictated that the accuser spoke before the accused, shaping the frame of guilt before defense could even be imagined. The first narrative becomes the lens, and every following sentence is a reaction rather than a creation. Modern psychology confirms what these rituals intuited long ago. The first position becomes an anchor. Behavioral economists call it anchoring bias. Once the opening offer is on the table, every counteroffer or adjustment is pulled toward it, no matter how unreasonable it may be. In salary negotiations, the person who names the first number often drags the conversation into their orbit. In peace talks, the side that declares its vision first can force the other into defensive justifications instead of fresh proposals. Silence may feel dignified, but it often seeds the most powerful weapon in the room. Even body language follows this hidden order. The first speaker doesn't just command ears, they command eyes. Everyone's gaze tilts toward them, giving them the throne of the circle. That focus becomes authority, and authority becomes momentum. In corporate boardrooms, the CEO often speaks last to appear balanced, but in practice their eventual words weigh more because the room has already been shaped by anticipation. Silence can be a throne too, but only when backed by recognized rank. For everyone else, silence risks invisibility. Digital life has not erased the ritual, it has magnified it. In online debates, the first comment beneath a post often frames the tone of the entire discussion. If the first reply is mocking, every comment after tends to sharpen its claws. If the first is thoughtful, nuance survives longer. Social platforms reward the opening voice with likes and visibility, turning it into a de facto authority. In chat rooms, in Slack threads, even in email chains, the first framing becomes the architecture others unconsciously build upon. Look at political debates. The opening statement is rarely the strongest argument, it is the seed planted in listeners' minds. Even if forgotten consciously, it bends the soil for everything that follows. That is why governments, unions, corporations all fight for the privilege of the first word at negotiation tables. It is not just ceremony, it is tactical primacy. The order is the weapon. But there is a darker side. In mediation circles designed for equality, letting one party speak first can unintentionally grant them dominance. That is why some traditions use talking sticks or stones passed around, forcing order, preventing hierarchy from hijacking fairness. Yet even then, whoever sets the first tone can decide whether the circle will be warlike or peaceful, accusatory or healing. Words do not only describe reality, they create it. And the first word is creation itself. Think about the last argument you had. Who spoke first? Who framed the issue? Did you spend the rest of the conversation trapped inside their wording? If someone says, "You always ignore me," and that's the opening, you are pulled into defense rather than rewriting the story. The circle closes around their phrase. Without realizing it, the ritual has already chosen its victor. This matters because mediation is not just about compromise, it is about shaping the world that will follow. The first voice can anchor hope, or it can anchor hostility. A skilled mediator knows this and sometimes refuses to speak first, forcing silence to stretch until someone's urgency breaks it. In that moment, the one who fills the void creates the map for everyone else. So when you sit at a table, when you step into a circle, when you watch for the opening of negotiation, pay attention. The order of voices is not neutral. It is the invisible crown passed around the room, the scepter disguised as a phrase. Whoever speaks first does not just talk. They cast the spell that binds every voice after them. Lineage credential effect. Imagine walking into a grand hall of opportunity. The doors are wide, but they don't swing open for everyone the same way. For some, the hinges groan and resist, demanding proof of skill, years of grinding, endless tests. But for others, the doors glide open almost silently, because of a name, a lineage, a family history. This is the lineage credential effect, the strange power of ancestry, where heritage acts as a key that merit alone often cannot forge. For thousands of years, this was the most explicit form of hierarchy. In monarchies, the crown did not pass to the most capable warrior or the wisest strategist, it passed through blood. You could be weak, cruel, or even incompetent, but if your veins carried the right ancestry, the throne was yours. Dynasties thrived on this principle, building entire nations around family lines. The Ming emperors of China, the pharaohs of Egypt, the Bourbons of France, all examples of bloodline outweighing merit. The message was clear: who you were born to mattered far more than who you actually were. Even in supposedly meritocratic societies, the pattern survives. Think about modern politics. Families like the Kennedys in America, the Nehru Gandhis in India, or the Bhuttos in Pakistan, generation after generation, political influence follows the family name. Voters often treat the surname as a credential, a stamp of authority. A newcomer without that name has to fight, beg, and bleed for recognition, while an heir inherits influence before they've proven a thing. It is not the law of the land that enforces this. It is the psychology of people who believe heritage itself carries legitimacy. The corporate world offers no escape. Family dynasties dominate industries, from the Rockefellers in oil to the Waltons in retail. Even when companies claim to hire on merit, the quiet weight of lineage tilts the scales. An heir to a wealthy family can make phone calls that an ordinary genius cannot. A single introduction, a whispered recommendation, the casual mention of a famous last name, doors swing open where they would slam shut for others. The child of privilege starts the race not at the starting line, but halfway to the finish. Psychologists describe this as inherited social capital. It is not just wealth, but networks, reputations, and the silent aura of legitimacy that cling to certain names. A graduate from an obscure background may hold the same degree as a descendant of prestige, yet the latter carries a hidden badge that says, "You can trust me. My family already proved itself." The irony is sharp. Meritocracy was supposed to dismantle this system, yet lineage slips through the cracks, bending the rules without ever being written into law. Examples appear everywhere. In Hollywood, family names recycle fame. A son or daughter of a famous actor lands roles not because of unique talent, but because audiences and producers are already primed to value the bloodline. In academia, the children of professors or intellectuals find mentors, access, and trust far more easily than equally capable outsiders. Even in sports, legacy recruits, children of alumni or former stars, are given opportunities first. The myth of meritocracy persists, but the lineage credential effect continues its quiet reign. What makes this phenomenon haunting is that it often hides under the illusion of fairness. Rarely will someone admit, "I was chosen because of my family." Instead, the lineage operates invisibly, disguised as coincidence or natural talent. But if we look closely, we see the traces. The recommendation letter written because the family name is known. The internship offered because a parent happened to know someone. The invitation to exclusive circles, where deals are made long before outsiders are even aware of them. This is not always corruption in the open sense. It is the silent tilt of the playing field. And yet, lineage does more than open doors. It shapes how people are perceived once inside. A descendant of privilege can fail repeatedly and still be given second chances, because their heritage creates a cushion of credibility. Meanwhile, an outsider must succeed flawlessly, over and over, just to be considered equal. This unequal distribution of forgiveness and opportunity is perhaps the clearest proof that the past still chains the present. But the lineage credential effect also carries a darker burden. For those who inherit the privilege, their identity becomes entangled with expectations. A child of a great dynasty may never be judged for themselves, only as a continuation, or disappointment, of the line. Their achievements are often dismissed as products of nepotism, their failures magnified as betrayals of legacy. The door swings open easily, but walking through it without being crushed by the weight of a family name is another trial entirely. So we are left with a paradox. On the one hand, society claims to value individuality, merit, and hard work. On the other, we are still captivated by ancestry, by the myth that bloodline itself contains legitimacy. Whether in politics, business, or culture, family heritage still whispers its power, shaping destinies silently but decisively. And maybe this is the most unsettling truth. While skill can earn respect and effort can win recognition, lineage carries a timeless authority that operates beneath reason, beneath law, beneath fairness. We may deny it, resist it, criticize it, but when the door opens at the sound of a name, we are reminded that the past is never just the past. It is a credential stamped into the present, one that merit alone may never overcome. Masked role performance. A mask is not just cloth or paint. A mask is a doorway. The moment it covers a face, it transforms the person beneath it. This truth is older than theater, older than carnival, older even than religion. For in the beginning, masks were not entertainment, they were power. In ancient rituals, masks allowed humans to step outside themselves, to embody gods, spirits, animals, ancestors. A man in a mask was no longer a man. He was something greater, something feared, something obeyed. And though today we tell ourselves we live free of such illusions, the reality is more unsettling. We are still wearing masks. Not of wood or clay, but of roles, identities, and expectations. Every workplace, every family, every society asks us to perform behind a mask. And like our ancestors, we obey. In the great theaters of Greece, the mask was sacred. It signaled to the crowd who stood before them, the king, the fool, the mourner, the god. No actor spoke as himself, he spoke through the mask. The Romans carried this forward, using masks to define characters so clearly that audiences knew instantly what role was being played. But theater was only the reflection of an older truth. In tribal rituals across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, masks were used to summon spirits, enforce laws, or terrify enemies. To wear the mask was to borrow authority. The mask did not hide, it revealed. It told everyone, this is not me. This is the role I have become. Today, we tell ourselves masks are gone. But look closer. A uniform is a mask. A title is a mask. A job description is a mask. A parent tucking in their child wears a mask of authority and comfort. A judge on the bench wears a mask of impartiality. A soldier in uniform wears the mask of discipline and obedience. Strip away these masks and you see the human underneath, flawed, afraid, uncertain. But in the mask, the role takes over. Society demands this performance. We are not merely individuals, we are actors in an endless ritual play. Think of how differently people behave once the mask of role is placed upon them. A gentle person in private may become ruthless in the role of officer. A timid man may roar with confidence when the mask of leader sits on his face. Even criminals adopt masks, both literal, to hide their faces, and figurative, to justify their actions as avengers or rebels. The transformation is real, not imagined. Studies show that when people are anonymized, when their faces are hidden, or when they believe they are just performing a role, their behavior changes dramatically. The mask frees them from personal consequence, but binds them to the expectations of the part they wear. This is why roles can be so dangerous. The mask allows ordinary people to commit acts they would never attempt in their own names. In history, soldiers have justified atrocities by saying, "I was only following orders." Bureaucrats have defended cruelty by claiming, "It was my role, not my choice." These are not excuses, they are the echoes of ancient rituals. The mask takes the blame. The person disappears. And behind the mask, humanity slips into shadow. Yet the mask is not only dangerous, it is necessary. Without roles, society collapses. A doctor must wear the mask of healer, even if their personal life is in ruins. A pilot must wear the mask of calm control, even if fear eats at their heart. A parent must wear the mask of strength, even when they want to collapse. These performances are not lies, they are survival. The mask is what allows order to exist in chaos. It is what lets us trust strangers, follow leaders, obey laws. We need masks as much as we fear them. And so, the ancient ritual lives on. When a priest lifts his hands, when a politician takes the podium, when a police officer puts on the badge, the mask is in place. We know it instinctively. We respect it, resent it, depend on it. And sometimes, we forget the person beneath even exists. The danger is not in wearing the mask. It is in believing the mask is real, that the role is the truth, that the performance is the person. History warns us, when societies worship the mask more than the human beneath, cruelty follows. The Inquisition, the concentration camps, the purges, all were carried out by people convinced they were only playing their roles. So here is the haunting truth, the mask is eternal. Whether carved from wood or stitched into uniform, whether painted on a dancer's face or hidden behind a digital avatar, the mask remains the tool through which humans organize power and meaning. We are still the actors of ancient ritual, still bowing to the roles we play, still binding ourselves to masks that shape our lives more than any law. Ask yourself, what mask do you wear every day? And when the time comes to take it off, will anyone still know who you are underneath? Tribute expectation cycle. From the earliest kingdoms to today's boardrooms, power has always demanded tribute. Ancient rulers expected grain, gold, livestock, or jewels to prove loyalty. Villages would line up with offerings not just to avoid punishment but to secure favor, protection, or visibility. This ritual was never about the objects themselves, it was about recognition of hierarchy. And though the thrones have changed, the pattern persists. We now call them gifts, tokens of appreciation, or corporate hospitality, but the cycle is the same, tribute as a language of power. Consider the empires of Mesopotamia, or Egypt. Farmers delivered a share of their harvest to kings and priests, not because those rulers needed more food, but because the act reinforced submission. In medieval courts, vassals brought ornate chalices, rare fabrics, or prized animals as proof of loyalty. The tribute was symbolic currency, a visible acknowledgement that authority flowed only one way. Refusal was not just stinginess, it was rebellion. Fast forward to modern corporations, and the logic has not changed. Executives receive lavish gifts from partners, luxury hampers during festivals, or all-expense-paid trips disguised as networking opportunities. Employees bring tokens, flowers, bottles of wine, handmade cards, to bosses on birthdays or retirement days. Clients send holiday packages not just as thanks, but as investment in future goodwill. The gesture is less about generosity than about positioning. By offering, you subtly remind the leader or superior that you recognize their power and hope to remain within its shelter. Even political systems follow the cycle. Lobbyists shower lawmakers with donations, dinners, and favors. Nations exchange ceremonial gifts during state visits, items carefully chosen to symbolize respect and allegiance. None of these gifts are necessary for survival, yet they grease the machinery of influence. They are modern tributes wrapped in etiquette and ceremony, performing the same function as offerings once placed at the foot of a throne. The psychology of tribute is simple. Humans crave acknowledgement of rank. A gift downward feels like benevolence, a gift upward feels like loyalty. Leaders expect it without demanding it outright, because the pattern has been burned into social memory for millennia. Corporations exploit it by institutionalizing gift-giving cycles, from annual bonuses to branded merchandise, ensuring that employees and customers alike participate in the ritual of exchange. The tribute expectation cycle also thrives on reciprocity. Once a gift is given, an obligation is created. An emperor who received a rare horse might later grant favor. A CEO who accepts a luxury pen from a supplier may unconsciously tilt toward their deal. Gifts blur into obligations, obligations blur into loyalty, and loyalty hardens into hierarchy. What seems like kindness is often a transaction coded in culture. Even the smallest acts reflect this. Students bringing chocolates to teachers, citizens offering garlands to politicians, employees buying lunch for managers, all echo the same ancestral rhythm. The act is not about the object itself but the acknowledgement of dependence. To stop offering feels dangerous, as if stepping out of the cycle risks invisibility or exclusion. And so, from ancient temples to skyscraper offices, the tribute expectation cycle endures. Leaders still sit at the center, and people still approach with offerings, whether of gold, fruit, or gift cards. The names have changed, but the meaning has not. Tribute, in every age, is less about generosity than survival, less about affection than acknowledgement. And as long as power exists, so too will the ritual of gifts that flow upward, binding people in a cycle of obedience masked as courtesy. Written word sanctity. We live in a world of voices, speeches, debates, endless chatter across phones and screens. But when words shift from breath to paper, something changes. Suddenly, the sentence hardens into law. The idea crystallizes into truth. A signature on a page outweighs 1,000 promises spoken aloud. This is the sanctity of the written word, the ancient, unspoken rule that printed text carries more authority than speech, shaping our history, our politics, and even our daily lives. Long before printing presses, rulers understood this power. In Mesopotamia, Hammurabi carved his code into stone not to invent laws but to freeze them. Words spoken by kings could be doubted, forgotten, twisted. Words etched in stone became unchallengeable. The scribe's chisel carried more weight than the monarch's tongue. To record something was to sanctify it, to raise it above rumor and fleeting command. Religions carried this reverence even further. Sacred texts defined civilizations because they transformed the invisible voice of the divine into physical permanence. The Torah, the Quran, the Bible. These were not mere teachings but anchors of authority because they were written. A sermon can be questioned. A scroll cannot. Once words were inked, they transcended time, traveling across generations with a force no living voice could match. In the Middle Ages, kings and popes weaponized this sanctity. Bulls, charters, decrees, documents sealed with wax determined wars, marriages, and the fates of nations. A knight's oath in speech might fade with the wind, but a treaty in writing chained kingdoms for centuries. Monarchs were judged not by what they said in grand halls but by what their scribes recorded in ink. Even illiterate masses bowed to the sight of parchment, sensing its unspoken command. This is truth, because it is written. The printing press multiplied this power beyond imagination. Suddenly, words were no longer fragile, whispered, or lost in memory. They were replicated, distributed, immortalized. Luther's 95 Theses nailed to a church door would have been forgotten if only spoken in taverns. In print, they toppled the monopoly of the Catholic Church and ignited the Reformation. Pamphlets, newspapers, manifestos, all carried a gravity no street corner orator could match. Once in print, ideas became armies. Even revolutions turned on the sanctity of text. The American colonies did not rise on speeches alone. It was the Declaration of Independence, ink on parchment, that legitimized rebellion. France stormed toward terror and liberty alike not just on shouts but on written decrees. When Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto, they did not stand in every village to proclaim it. They printed it, knowing the printed page would spread faster, endure longer, strike deeper. The written word was not a weapon beside speech. It was the weapon that transformed speech into permanence. Why does this sanctity persist? Psychology gives us clues. The human mind treats written words as fixed. Speech feels fluid, unreliable, shaped by tone, memory, or misunderstanding. But writing feels objective, as if the page itself guarantees truth. Even when we know texts can lie, we still instinctively trust them more than fleeting speech. A doctor's advice sounds one way when spoken, but when handed as a written prescription, it becomes absolute. A teacher's spoken promise may fade, but printed grades define futures. In daily life, the same reverence lingers. Consider contracts. A spoken deal sealed with a handshake may carry honor, but when disputes arise, only the document survives. The written word becomes the arbiter of memory, erasing all other versions. Or think of laws. Citizens do not obey the shouted commands of leaders, they obey statutes printed and codified. Even technology continues this tradition. An email confirmation carries more weight than a phone promise. A message screenshot is treated as evidence more solid than anyone's testimony. We still treat text as sacred, even in the age of misinformation. But this sanctity is double-edged. Writing has been used to oppress as often as to liberate. Colonial powers imposed written treaties that natives could not read, binding entire peoples under lies etched into paper. Dictatorships still weaponize documents, laws, constitutions, proclamations, to disguise tyranny as legitimacy. A ruler's speech can be forgotten. A ruler's decree on paper lives on, imprisoning generations. And yet, societies rarely question the hierarchy itself. We know that spoken words can be deceptive, but we forget that written ones can be equally false. The sanctity of the written word has allowed propaganda, forged treaties, fake documents, and misinformation campaigns to wield enormous power precisely because we believe, if it's written, it must be real. The medium cloaks the message with authority. But this sanctity also explains why writing remains humanity's greatest tool of progress. Scientific revolutions relied on written journals, not fleeting lectures. Constitutions preserved liberty because they were inked, not just dreamed aloud. Civil rights movements rose on written speeches turned into documents, circulating beyond the reach of censors. Even today, when leaders want to signal finality, they put pen to paper, sign a bill, and hold it aloft for cameras. The ritual proves the law is not just spoken, it is real. So the next time you see a signature on a treaty, a printed headline shaking a nation, or even a simple document notarized in an office, remember, the power does not lie only in the words themselves, but in the form they take. The sanctity of the written word has made paper stronger than steel, ink sharper than any blade. Spoken words vanish into the air. Written ones linger, judge, bind, and command. This is why tyrants fear printing presses, why dissidents smuggle pamphlets, why we screenshot conversations and preserve receipts. We instinctively know what ancient kings and priests already understood. Once written, words become sacred, almost untouchable. And in that sanctity lies both our freedom and our chains. Purity, ritual, persistence. Cleanliness has always been more than hygiene. It is ritual, boundary, and judgment wrapped in soap and water. Long before germs were discovered, societies equated purity with morality, and filth with sin. To wash was not just to clean the body, it was to cleanse the soul, to mark yourself as worthy of belonging. And though we live in an age of science and sanitation, the old codes persist. Today, cleanliness still shapes who is welcomed, who is shunned, who is trusted, and who is silently cast aside. In ancient religions, purity rituals structured daily life. Hindus performed ablutions before prayer, Jews practiced mikveh immersions, Muslims continue the wudu before entering the mosque. These were not optional, they were social passports. Without them, one was unfit to join the community of the faithful. Ancient Rome too demanded baths, not simply for health, but for civic identity. To be dirty was to be barbarian. To be clean was to be Roman. In every culture, the act of washing was a declaration. I belong, I respect the sacred order, I am one of you. Those echoes remain. In modern offices, someone who arrives disheveled, unshaven, or with stained clothes faces a silent barrier. People may not speak it, but their body recoils, trust fades. Cleanliness signals discipline, self-control, and respectability. A polished appearance is still read as moral fitness. The clean-cut employee, the fresh candidate, the well-groomed leader, these are linguistic fossils of purity codes. It is no coincidence that criminals are often described as dirty and heroes as pure. The metaphors reveal the persistence of ancient logic. Consider handshakes. Once a way to prove no weapon was hidden, they now carry another layer. Is the hand clean? In the wake of pandemics, hand sanitizer became a new holy water. Offices installed dispensers at every door, and those who refused the ritual squirt of gel were silently marked as reckless, even dangerous. A clear continuation of purity policing, performed not at temples but at doorways, not by priests but by receptionists and managers. Food, too, carries these rituals. Dietary restrictions, once born of religious codes, survive as social boundaries. Veganism, gluten-free living, organic-only choices, they may be framed in terms of health or ethics, but they also function as modern purity systems. Shared meals test belonging. Will you eat what is offered, or will you declare yourself separate by refusing? Every potluck, every dinner party still negotiates purity. To share food is to be clean enough to trust. To refuse, or to eat wrong, risks exclusion. The obsession with detox culture, with cleanses, with products that promise purity, is no different. Advertisements talk of washing away toxins, purifying skin, renewing freshness. It is ancient purification with new packaging. Gyms, spas, even skincare routines are modern shrines, where people prove discipline and worthiness through ritualized cleansing. To neglect these rituals is to risk not only health, but social standing. A person who lets themselves go is treated as fallen, tainted, in need of restoration. Language itself betrays the persistence. Clean record means innocence. Dirty money means corruption. Pure intentions means virtue. Even in politics, leaders insist they are clean, free of scandal, while their enemies are tainted. The old purity lens has simply shifted from rivers and temples to headlines and tweets. And in digital life, the same logic continues. Unfollowed accounts are called toxic. Platforms encourage us to clean up our feeds, to purge the impure voices. We block, mute, and curate as if disinfecting our social spaces. Online reputation management is digital hygiene, scrubbing, polishing, sanitizing identity to remain acceptable. Just as ancient priests controlled who could enter the sacred space, algorithms now police who is visible, who is shadowed, who is exiled. But there is a danger. Purity rituals, old or new, do not just protect, they exclude. Those who cannot meet the standards are cast out. In ancient times, lepers were banished beyond the city walls. Today, the homeless are shunned, their unwashed bodies treated as moral failings. During pandemics, suspicion fell hardest on those without resources to sanitize constantly. The ritual of cleanliness, meant to bind communities, can also divide them. So the next time you instinctively recoil at someone's appearance, or feel relief after washing your hands, or judge a leader as clean or dirty, remember, you are participating in a script written thousands of years ago. The soap, the sanitizer, the scented wipe, these are the holy waters of our age. And behind every act of scrubbing lies the same ancient truth. Purity is power. It decides who belongs and who does not. Cleanliness, then, is not just about health. It is about identity, trust, and acceptance. The rituals of purity never vanished, they merely changed costumes. And whether you realize it or not, every drop of water, every pressed shirt, every sanitized handshake still tells the world, I am worthy. I am one of you. Let me in. Signal color inheritance. Picture yourself at a busy intersection. The light turns red and every car halts instantly. The signal shifts to green, and the engines roar forward. Yellow flickers, and drivers tense between braking or speeding. These colors don't just guide us, they command us. Red means danger, green means safety, yellow means caution. We accept them as universal, unquestionable truths. But here's the haunting detail. These meanings are not natural. They are inherited ancient codes of war and survival, carried across centuries into the modern world of traffic, safety, and regulation. Think back to battlefields long before cars ever existed. In ancient and medieval warfare, color was one of the simplest ways to communicate across the chaos. Bright banners, painted shields, and burning signals told armies when to charge, when to hold, when to retreat. Red was chosen for blood, fire, and warning. It was visible from far away, a declaration of danger and aggression. Green, tied to fertile land and safety from hunger, meant refuge, rest, or secure ground. Yellow, the color of flames and disease, often served as a warning, uncertain, unstable, a demand for caution. These associations were not arbitrary. They were born from survival, from what the human eye could recognize most clearly in moments of crisis. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you find the first railroads facing the same problem armies had: how to control vast movements with simple, unmistakable signals. They borrowed the war codes. Red lamps meant stop, danger, or blocked track. Green lamps meant go, the path is clear. Yellow was introduced as a buffer, a warning that red was coming next, echoing the uncertainty of battle. The battlefield banners had become industrial signals. And when automobiles arrived, the system simply migrated. The war codes were reborn at every intersection, silently governing billions of drivers every single day. But the influence goes even further. In safety design, the same logic rules. Fire alarms flash red because red is threat. Emergency stop buttons are painted red because the mind links it with survival. Green exit signs guide people to safety in burning buildings, just as green once marked safe zones in combat. Yellow hazard tape, warning vests, and caution signs scream uncertainty. Don't proceed without awareness. Every workplace, every construction site, every emergency plan is wired into these color codes. We think of them as common sense, but they are inherited instincts shaped by centuries of danger, discipline, and war. Psychologists confirm that color is one of the most immediate triggers in human perception. Red wavelengths catch the eye first, raising heart rate, spiking alertness, perfect for signals of threat. Green soothes, lowers anxiety, promising security. Yellow, bright and ambiguous, hovers between alarm and neutrality. These responses are older than cities, older than cars. They are written in the biology of sight and sharpened by centuries of human conflict. Consider how powerfully this inheritance shapes our lives. A soldier on a battlefield centuries ago raised a red flag to warn of enemy attack. Today, a flashing red light on the dashboard tells you the engine is failing. A green banner once rallied troops to advance. Now a glowing green sign pushes you across the street. The logic is seamless, continuous. We no longer see the battlefield, but the code lives on, reshaped for asphalt and steel instead of swords and spears. And yet, there is something almost mythic in how absolute these codes have become. No one questions why red must mean stop or why green must mean go. The colors have become law, not because nature decreed it, but because war and survival carved those meanings into us. They are invisible relics of battlefields, carried into boardrooms, factories, highways, and homes. We obey them without thought, as if they were eternal truths. The unsettling truth is this: every time you brake at a red light, or breathe relief at a green exit sign, you are obeying orders written long before you were born. Orders shaped by armies that needed clarity in chaos, by generals who needed colors to command life and death. The war is over, but the code remains. So the next time you pass a traffic light or see a warning sign, remember what you are really looking at. Not just colors, not just rules of the road, but ancient signals of war, ghosts of battle banners, still telling you when to halt, when to advance, when to fear. The battlefield has disappeared, but the code of colors still commands us, silently shaping every move we make. Threshold crossing rites. Crossing a threshold seems so ordinary. A door opens, a foot steps forward, and you pass from one space into another. Yet beneath this simple action lies one of humanity's oldest and most powerful rituals, the rite of crossing. From the huts of ancient tribes to the gates of empires, from temples to courtrooms, thresholds have never been just wood, stone, or metal. They are boundaries between worlds. To cross one is to change your status, your role, even your very identity. And whether we admit it or not, this ancient code still governs us today. In the earliest societies, thresholds were sacred. The entrance to a home was not merely a doorway, it was a protective barrier. Spirits were thought to linger there, both protective and hostile. That is why so many cultures place charms above their doors: horseshoes, carved faces, bundles of herbs. The Romans worshipped Janus, the two-faced god of thresholds and beginnings, who looked both inward and outward at once. To cross a threshold was to invite change, and change always required respect. Step without acknowledgement, and you risked angering the unseen forces that guarded the boundary. Marriage itself once revolved around this principle. The old custom of carrying a bride over the threshold was not romantic at its root, it was defensive. It protected her from tripping, which would have been an omen of misfortune, and it shielded her from the spirits that were believed to cling to doorways, waiting to curse the vulnerable. Religious sites had their own versions. Before entering a temple, one washed hands, removed shoes, or bowed at the gate. These acts were not hygiene or courtesy alone, they were thresholds rites, acknowledgments that you were leaving the profane world behind and stepping into the sacred. But thresholds were never only spiritual. They were social and political as well. To cross into another's home without invitation was an insult, even an act of war. To be allowed in, by contrast, was a mark of trust. Feudal lords demanded elaborate ceremonies when receiving guests, because the act of stepping into their hall symbolized the recognition of authority. Diplomats in medieval courts performed gestures of submission before passing through palace doors, because the threshold itself represented power. The message was clear: crossing this line means you accept the rules within. Even in modern times, the echo lingers. Think of how courtrooms require you to rise when the judge enters, or how government offices demand you pass through security checks before stepping inside. Think of how schools, hospitals, and even private clubs have rituals for entry: ID badges, visitor logs, uniforms. These are not just practical measures. They are the descendants of ancient threshold rites, reminders that to step inside is to accept transformation. You are no longer just a private person, you are now a participant in the order of that place. And what about the personal thresholds we all carry? Think of how you feel when you cross into someone else's home. Instinctively, you lower your voice, you wait to be invited to sit, you sense the shift in power. The air itself feels different, not because of physics but because of symbolism. Or think of how stepping into a hospital makes you behave differently. More cautious, more respectful, as though the walls themselves demand reverence. These are modern echoes of the same truth. Thresholds are not neutral. They carry meaning that shapes behavior. But thresholds also carry danger. To cross one is to expose yourself. Once you step inside, you accept the possibility of being bound, judged, or changed. That is why so many myths warn of fateful crossings: the hero stepping into the underworld, the wanderer entering the enchanted castle, the soldier marching through the city gates. Every crossing carries risk, because every crossing implies transformation. Some thresholds elevate, others ensnare. And once you step over, there is rarely a way back unchanged. Even technology has created new thresholds. Think of logging into a digital platform, passing through passwords and verifications. Each step is a ritualized threshold. You are no longer simply yourself. You are now your online persona, bound by the rules and dangers of that domain. The screen has become a doorway, and the crossing is no less symbolic than walking into a temple or courtroom centuries ago. So when you next open a door, swipe a card, or step across a marked line, remember this: you are not just moving through space. You are repeating a ritual older than civilization itself. You are leaving one world and entering another, with all the risks and responsibilities that come with it. Thresholds are more than stone and wood. They are the silent judges of who you were before and who you will become after. The haunting truth is this: no crossing is ever trivial. Whether it is a bride carried into her new home, a pilgrim stepping into a holy site, or a stranger walking through the gates of power, the threshold transforms. The question is never whether you cross, but what you become once you have stepped inside. Warning signal legacy. In every age, survival has depended on sound. Before written words, before flashing screens, human communities relied on vibrations in the air to signal danger. A horn bellowing across valleys, a drum pounding through forests, a bell ringing in the dead of night. These were the alarms of survival, forcing bodies to react before minds could process. The warning signal legacy is this unbroken chain of auditory command, from ancient horns to modern sirens, from drums to digital alerts. We are still creatures conditioned to obey a sound. Imagine a walled city under siege. Guards on the tower blow a ram's horn. Its raw note is not music, it is urgency, fear carved into air. Farmers in the fields drop tools. Women gather children. Soldiers rush to posts. One sound rearranges an entire society in seconds. Or think of coastal villages where a conch shell warned of storms, its low echo carrying farther than a shout. The instruments were chosen not for beauty but for reach, for their ability to pierce the chaos of wind, rain, or battle. Across cultures, the pattern is the same. African kingdoms used talking drums to transmit warnings over miles, coding language into rhythm. In Europe, church bells tolled alarms not only for prayer but for fire or invasion. In Asia, gongs roared across temple courtyards to summon warriors or signal curfews. These were technologies of obedience, tools that bypassed argument and triggered instinct. A warning sound doesn't ask you to think, it demands you to act. Modern alerts still work on the same psychology. Sirens wail with oscillating tones that mirror human screams, designed to be impossible to ignore. Car alarms, ambulance horns, air raid sirens, each borrows from the primal logic of ancient signals: shock, interrupt, compel. Even phone notifications, those tiny digital chimes, are descendants of war drums and horns. They slice through silence, demanding your eyes, your hands, your attention. A single ping can rearrange your priorities as surely as a war horn once rearranged an army. Consider emergency systems. Tornado sirens in the American Midwest mimic the long, trembling rise of ancient horns. Tsunami warnings in Japan use loudspeakers mounted in villages, a high-tech version of temple bells. Even airports use rhythmic chimes before announcements, conditioning travelers to stop speaking and listen. The logic is always the same. Create a distinct sound that cuts across distance, emotion, and context, compelling obedience faster than reason. There's also a psychological weight in collective memory. When we hear sirens, our bodies react before thought. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, attention narrows. This reaction is not just modern conditioning, it is ancestral inheritance. For thousands of years, survival meant responding instantly to a sound that signaled threat. Today, even in a peaceful city, that legacy remains. A siren in the distance still feels like an order carved into our nerves. And warnings have expanded beyond danger to discipline. School bells tell children when to sit, when to move, when to stop. Factory whistles once dictated the rhythm of industrial life. The modern workplace alarm, the meeting notification, even the microwave beep, they all descend from the same tradition: sound as authority. The horn has become digital, but the obedience remains. The warning signal legacy proves that while civilizations change, the body remembers. We are still tuned to respond to blasts, beats, and tones as if our survival depends on it. 1,000 years ago, the call of a horn might have saved a village from raiders. Today, the wail of a siren might save a city from fire. And in between, every beep, bell, and chime keeps us tied to that ancient truth. Sound rules us more than silence, and in its echo lives the chain of obedience that connects us to every ancestor who once froze at the blast of a horn or ran at the pound of a drum. Mourning color code: when grief strikes, words often fail. So humanity turns to symbols, gestures, rituals, colors. Among the most enduring of these is the mourning color code, the centuries-old signal that to dress in black is to declare loss, respect, and sorrow. No law compels it. No decree demands it. Yet from medieval courts to modern cemeteries, the black garment has become a silent language of grief, one that still governs how we mourn in public. The origins stretch deep into antiquity. In ancient Rome, mourners wore dark togas, rejecting the bright white of celebration. The dim cloth marked them as set apart, living under the shadow of death. It warned others, "Treat me gently, for I carry sorrow." Early Christians inherited the custom, shaping black into the uniform of humility, a way to strip away vanity in the face of the grave. By the Middle Ages, The code had hardened into ritual. Nobles dressed entire courts in black for months after a king's death, turning cities into theaters of collective grief. But the code was never universal. In parts of Asia, white became the mourning shade, the color of purity, the blank canvas symbolizing the soul's departure. In some African cultures, red signified the blood tie to the dead. Yet in the West, black triumphed. Why? Because black was absence, the void, the end of light. To wear it was to embody the grave itself. Over centuries, it became not only tradition but obligation. A widow in Elizabethan England was expected to wear black for a year or more, her clothing a living prison of grief. Failure to do so invited whispers of coldness, even accusations of disrespect to the dead. Royal courts codified it further. When Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, died in 1861, she retreated into black for 40 years. Her endless mourning spread through Europe like contagion, shaping fashion itself. Mourning dresses, veils, gloves, even jewelry carved from jet stone became industries. To sell mourning clothing was to profit from ritualized grief. And the public, seeing their monarch wrapped in perpetual shadow, absorbed the lesson. To mourn is not only private pain but public performance, marked visibly on the body. The code filtered down into every layer of society. Funerals became oceans of black. The procession of mourners announced loss before any words were spoken. The clothing itself carried authority. No one would dare appear in bright colors at the graveside without risking outrage. Black was not just tradition, it was demand. It told the living, remember your mortality. It told the grieving, show your suffering. It told the community, this is how respect is proven. Even now, in an age of blurred customs, the code endures. Attend a funeral in Europe or America, and black still dominates. Stray from it, and you will feel eyes turn, silently questioning your respect. In offices, black armbands are worn to mark loss. In sports, entire teams dress in black to honor fallen members. Leaders still appear in dark suits when nations grieve, knowing the public reads their attire as solidarity in mourning. The code persists because it is more than fashion, it is language. But why does color hold such force? Psychologists argue that humans read color instinctively, linking dark shades with danger, endings, and solemnity. Black absorbs light, it gives nothing back. To wear it is to embody gravity itself. The uniformity of color also matters. When mourners dress alike, the group becomes a chorus of grief, a single body speaking silence. The code prevents chaos, ensuring that in moments of death, there is order, ritual, and clarity. Yet the mourning color code also exposes the tension between authenticity and performance. Do we wear black because we feel grief, or because we are told that to grieve properly, we must show it visibly? What happens when someone mourns differently, by wearing the favorite colors of the dead, or by rejecting the void of black for the brightness of memory? In some modern funerals, families now invite guests to wear colors, turning the ceremony into a celebration of life rather than a theater of sorrow. Still, even these rebellions exist only because the old code is so strong. They are exceptions carved from a rule that endures. The code has even adapted to the digital age. Profile pictures turn black in collective mourning. Social feeds flood with black ribbons, candles, and shaded images. The fabric has vanished, but the signal remains. Black equals grief. The centuries-old law translates seamlessly onto glowing screens. But its endurance also carries danger. For some, the pressure to conform, to wear black, to show mourning properly, becomes another weight on grief. Those who cannot or will not follow the code risk judgment, as if failure in attire means failure in love. It reveals how mourning, the most personal of emotions, is also the most publicly policed. Black clothing is not just a choice. It is a demand, silently enforced by the gaze of others. Still, the code survives because it works. In the face of death, when words collapse, we need signals. We need order, ritual, something visible to make the invisible bearable. To dress in black is to say without speaking, I honor the dead, I share in loss, I walk under the shadow with you. It is both personal grief and collective solidarity, binding mourners into a single body of silence. So the next time you see a funeral procession, black clothing moving like a river of shadow, remember, you are witnessing one of humanity's oldest codes still in action. It is not written in law, but it governs more strictly than many statutes. It has shaped fashion, politics, and faith. It has demanded loyalty from queens and peasants alike. And as long as we need symbols to make sense of death, the mourning color code will endure, an unspoken language of grief stitched into the fabric of civilization. Locked door authority. A locked door is more than wood, metal, and a mechanism. It is a message. It says, what lies beyond is valuable, restricted, reserved for others, not for you. Across centuries, the lock has been more than a tool of safety, it has been an emblem of power. Castles with their iron gates, temples with their sealed chambers, banks with their vaults, all carried the same silent signal. Importance is measured by inaccessibility. And even today, in glass towers and electronic keypads, in password-protected files and biometric scanners, the locked door still rules as one of the oldest symbols of authority and exclusion. Think of how architecture stages this ritual. In medieval castles, the king's chamber was not only hidden deep within stone walls, but behind doors layered with bolts and guards. The lock wasn't just to protect him from assassins, it was to remind everyone that his presence was too sacred, too rare, too valuable for ordinary access. The locked door transformed a private space into a throne room, a symbol of hierarchy. And though centuries have passed, the same choreography continues in corporate offices. The executive floor is often accessible only with a special card, the boardroom tucked behind frosted glass, the private office behind an electronic lock. It is not only about security, it is about aura. The more barriers you must cross, the more authority the occupant appears to possess. Psychology confirms what ancient rulers understood. Humans instinctively equate difficulty of access with value. A locked diary feels more precious than an open notebook. A nightclub with a velvet rope feels more desirable than one anyone can walk into. Even children learn early that what is off-limits must matter more than what is freely given. The locked door whispers, there is a secret, and secrets create power. In daily life, we bow to these signals without question. The employee who swipes their badge and passes through a door, others cannot become someone of status. The student who can enter the staff-only room feels upgraded. The hospital ward marked authorized personnel only creates an aura of expertise and authority around those allowed inside. The ritual is everywhere. A metal latch, a plastic card, a password typed on a glowing screen, all versions of the same old lock and key drama. And exclusion always runs parallel. For every person allowed in, many are denied. That is the point. In religious traditions, holy spaces were often closed off, accessible only to priests. In politics, locked chambers housed councils where the public could not tread. Today, the digital password or biometric scan achieves the same, a private world guarded against the many. The exclusion is not a side effect, it is the essence. The door does not only protect what is inside, it defines who is outside. Even in symbolic spaces, the ritual thrives. Online, private groups, gated communities, and exclusive memberships mimic the locked door. Invite only becomes the modern phrase for the bolt and key. To be invited is to feel chosen. To be shut out is to feel lesser. In a strange way, the lock creates desire. Without it, the inside might not even matter. With it, the inside becomes coveted. But there is also fear hidden here. Locked doors stir unease because they suggest danger or forbidden knowledge. Secret societies, classified documents, restricted labs, what they conceal is imagined to be powerful, perhaps even threatening. The lock amplifies mystery. It tells us, if you are not meant to see, then what lies within must be extraordinary. Conspiracies are born not in open fields but behind locked doors. And yet, the ritual cuts both ways. The same locks that confer importance also breed resentment. Workers excluded from decision-making rooms distrust the leaders inside. Citizens shut out of government chambers suspect corruption. Students denied access to knowledge hunger for it more fiercely. Authority grows behind locked doors, but so does suspicion. The symbol is powerful, but it is double-edged. Still, society cannot function without them. From safes to server rooms, from embassies to bedrooms, locked doors shape how we value, how we trust, how we fear. They decide who belongs and who waits. And every time you hear the click of a lock, or watch a door swing shut behind someone else's keycard, you are not just seeing security in action, you are witnessing one of humanity's oldest performances of power. Because a locked door is never silent. It always speaks. And what it says is simple. Beyond this point lies authority. You may knock, you may wait, you may yearn, but until the key is granted, you remain outside. Punctuality respect pact. Picture a soldier standing at attention, waiting for the signal to move. In the military, 1 second late is not a small mistake, it can cost lives. Orders depend on timing, discipline depends on precision, and the chain of command collapses without strict synchronization. To be punctual in that world is not politeness, it is survival. And this is the root of the Punctuality Respect Pact, the unspoken rule that arriving on time is more than a convenience. It is a declaration of loyalty, respect, and seriousness, a ritual born in the trenches and drilled into society long after the battlefield faded. For centuries, armies defined culture far more than schools or offices did. Soldiers were trained that obedience without hesitation was the highest form of respect. If a captain commanded troops to march at dawn, they marched at dawn. If a cannon was to fire at the stroke of noon, it fired at noon. No excuses, no delays, no personal interpretation. That habit of rigid timing leaked into civilian life, shaping how societies understood trust and respect. To show up late was to signal weakness or disloyalty, as though you could not be relied upon in the critical moment. This militarized precision merged with industrialization. The factory bell replaced the bugle. Workers were expected to arrive on time not only to keep machines running, but to display discipline. The entire train system of the 19th century ran on timetables that echoed military orders. A train leaving 5 minutes late could derail supply chains, just as a late unit could ruin a battle. Clocks spread into homes, schools, and offices, and punctuality became a civic virtue, a mark of respectability. To be late was not just inefficient, it was dishonorable. Even today, the pact remains. When you arrive on time for a meeting, you are signaling more than punctuality. You are silently saying, I respect you, I take this seriously, I can be trusted. To be late, even by a few minutes, still carries the faint echo of betrayal. It suggests your time mattered more than theirs, that you broke the invisible contract of mutual respect. This is why in job interviews, lateness is almost unforgivable. The interviewer is not just judging your time management, they are judging whether you can be trusted with responsibility, whether you are reliable in the heat of pressure. Different cultures express this pact in varying intensities. In Germany or Japan, timeliness is treated with near military severity. A train arriving 1 minute late triggers apologies and compensation. To miss a meeting start by even seconds is a humiliation. In contrast, some cultures appear more relaxed, but even there, lateness carries layered meanings. In parts of the Mediterranean or South America, a delay may not be insulting, but it still communicates your status. Those with higher power arrive later, turning time into a subtle display of dominance. Yet even these patterns echo the military root. Timing is always tied to hierarchy and respect. Think about personal relationships. A friend who consistently shows up late erodes trust over time. A partner who keeps appointments precisely demonstrates care and seriousness. Parents scold children for tardiness not simply to teach efficiency, but to teach respect, echoing the military drill sergeant's lesson that timing equals loyalty. The rule is passed down quietly, generation after generation, until it becomes invisible, part of everyday life. What makes punctuality so powerful is that it operates as a silent language. No one needs to explain why a boss frowns at lateness, or why a bride would be furious if guests arrive halfway through the ceremony. We all know the meaning because history carved it into us. To honor time is to honor the people who share it. To dishonor time is to dishonor them. And yet, this pact also reveals its shadow. People can weaponize punctuality. A boss demands employees arrive on time but deliberately keeps them waiting, reinforcing power. A politician arrives late to signal importance. A lover shows up late to test patience. In these cases, breaking the pact becomes a performance, a reminder that time itself can be used as a tool of control. The roots are still military. Timing can serve as discipline or as domination. So the next time you check your watch before heading to a meeting, remember what you are really doing. You are not just keeping track of minutes, you are invoking an ancient pact of respect. You are echoing soldiers standing in formation, cannons firing on command, trains departing on the tick. To be punctual is to say, I stand with you, I recognize your importance, I can be counted on. And to be late is to whisper the opposite. Your time does not bind me, your order does not command me. In a world obsessed with freedom, it is strange how tightly we are still bound by the invisible chains of time. Yet perhaps that is why punctuality remains sacred. Because beneath the surface, timeliness is not about efficiency at all. It is about loyalty, respect, and the enduring shadow of military order that still shapes our lives. Blessing gesture continuity, a wave, a nod, 2 fingers raised in peace. These gestures feel small, almost automatic. We barely notice ourselves doing them. But behind each casual greeting hides a shadow of something far older and far heavier, the blessing gesture. Long before we used these signs to say hello, goodbye, or what's up, they were acts of invocation, symbols of protection, marks of divine favor. What today looks like a casual flick of the wrist was once a shield against evil, a prayer for safety, a sacred seal placed upon the one who received it. We think we are just greeting one another. In reality, we are echoing ancient blessings that refuse to die. In every civilization, the hand was sacred. The hand touched, built, and killed. It was the tool of gods and men alike. To extend it was not simply to move flesh, it was to move meaning. The raised hand of ancient priests was not a wave but a channel, a conduit calling divine power down upon the people. In Mesopotamia, priests lifted palms to the heavens, blessing kings and warriors before battle. In Egypt, carvings show pharaohs extending their hands over captives, claiming not just victory but authority sanctified by higher powers. To be blessed by a hand was to be marked as protected, chosen, worthy. As time moved on, these signs scattered into everyday life. The Christian cross traced with fingers over the body, the open palm of benediction in medieval art, the rabbinic hands lifted in the priestly blessing. All of these were continuations of the same ritual, the hand as vessel of power. And when these blessings slipped into secular life, they didn't vanish, they simply softened. The wave across the street, the casual salute, the peace sign, all of them are diluted descendants of hand signs once drenched in meaning. We think they are nothing more than politeness, but deep down, we still treat them as protection against distance and silence. Consider the handshake, itself once a sign of peace, showing the hand carried no weapon. Consider the military salute, born from knights lifting visors to show their faces. Consider the peace sign of 2 fingers, echoing ancient benedictions where pairs of fingers symbolized unity or dual blessing. Even the simple act of raising a hand in greeting carries the memory of ritual, an instinctive way of saying, I come in peace, I carry no threat, I offer goodwill. Every time we do it, we replay a gesture carved into humanity's oldest survival codes. But the continuity of blessing gestures is not just harmless tradition, it is a reminder of how symbols survive by hiding in plain sight. A child waving goodbye is unknowingly reenacting a ritual that once shielded travelers from evil spirits on their journey. A sports fan flashing 2 fingers is echoing a sign meant to call divine protection on warriors. Even digital emojis, praying hands, peace signs, waving icons, are not inventions of the internet but reincarnations of signs humans have carried for millennia. Our technology evolves, but our gestures remain haunted by the past. Why do they endure? Because the instinct behind them has never left us. We fear absence. We fear separation. We fear what might happen when someone leaves our sight, when words are not enough. A blessing gesture bridges that gap. It says, I see you, I acknowledge you, I send something invisible with you. And though we may no longer believe in the gods or spirits that once gave these signs their weight, we still cling to the ritual. Because deep down, we know that parting without gesture feels wrong, incomplete, unsafe. Yet the survival of these gestures also reveals a darker truth. When signs of blessing lose their meaning, they risk becoming empty performance. A soldier saluting a corrupt leader, a politician flashing peace while plotting violence, a person smiling and waving while hiding resentment. These are hollow blessings, rituals drained of sincerity. The gesture survives, but the spirit behind it rots. And in that gap between sign and meaning, trust collapses. That is why betrayal delivered with a handshake or wave feels especially poisonous. It is not just the person betraying, it is the ancient blessing itself, turned upside down. Still, we cannot let go of them. We keep raising our hands, flashing our fingers, nodding our heads. These are the spells of modern life, stripped of their gods but still binding us together. To stop would feel inhuman. Because gestures are not just communication, they are continuity. They carry the dead voices of our ancestors into the living present. So the next time you wave, salute, or throw up a peace sign, remember, you are not performing a meaningless motion. You are echoing a priest's benediction, a warrior's oath, a pharaoh's command. You are part of a chain that stretches back thousands of years, a chain of hands lifted to bless, protect, and acknowledge. What looks casual is actually sacred. And perhaps the haunting truth is this: even in our most ordinary greetings, we are still praying. Map boundary mentality. When you look at a map, it feels objective, lines drawn in ink, neat colors separating nations, the world reduced to order. But those lines are illusions that cut deeper than mountains or rivers ever could. Borders on maps are not physical walls, yet they shape identities, loyalties, and conflicts as if they were carved in stone. This is the map boundary mentality. The way human beings obey symbols on paper more than the land beneath their feet. In reality, the earth does not recognize these boundaries. Deserts stretch endlessly, forests spill across nations, rivers meander between territories without caring whose flag waves nearby. But draw a line on a map, and suddenly a farmer is not just a farmer, he is a citizen of one country or another. A village divided by a border becomes two villages, even if the people share the same food, language, and blood. A child grows up believing the line is natural, eternal, when in truth it was invented in a negotiation room, by rulers who may never have set foot on the soil they divided. Consider Africa. In the late 19th century, European powers carved the continent into colonies with rulers and pens, not geography. Straight lines split tribes, cultures, and ecosystems. Entire identities were rewritten because of mapmakers. To this day, conflicts flare in regions where the land itself never acknowledged those artificial cuts. The boundary lives not in the soil, but in the minds of people taught to defend it. Or think of India and Pakistan, where a hurried line on a map during partition uprooted millions. Families who had lived side by side for generations suddenly found themselves labeled as foreigners, or enemies. The border itself was invisible on the ground, but its psychological weight drove migrations, massacres, and decades of hostility. The land did not change in 1947, but the minds of its people did, shaped by the authority of ink. Even peaceful nations carry the burden. A Canadian standing near the U.S. border does not feel the earth shift beneath their feet. But a sign, a painted line, or a checkpoint instantly rewires perception. One step is home, the other is foreign. The rules, the taxes, the laws, even the sense of belonging. Everything changes in an instant, not because nature demanded it, but because a line on a piece of paper said so. The map boundary mentality extends beyond nations. City zoning maps dictate property values and school districts. A family on one side of a street may have access to better education or services than neighbors across the road. Corporations exploit borders by moving headquarters a few miles to lower tax rates. Sports fans cling to regional divisions as fiercely as citizens defend national ones. All of it flows from the psychology of drawn boundaries. And yet, the irony remains. Many borders are fluid. Rivers shift, coastlines erode, glaciers melt. Even the tectonic plates beneath us are moving, dragging continents into slow collision. But the human mind clings to borders as if they are eternal. A soldier will risk his life to defend a line no animal or tree can perceive. A citizen will feel pride or shame based on which side of a border they were born, even if the soil beneath both sides is identical. Maps are not mirrors of reality, they are blueprints of obedience. By drawing lines, we create divisions that live longer than empires, divisions that outlast the rulers who first sketched them. The power is not in the land, but in the mentality that land must be divided, owned, defended. Borders on maps dictate more than geography. They dictate identity, destiny, and conflict. And when you next glance at a map, remember, those neat lines have spilled more blood than any mountain or river ever has. The earth itself may not care where one color ends and another begins, but people do, because the map told them to.